I'm not going to jail, says Teen after being sentenced to life in prison for killing his parents. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled. Cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking like silent witnesses to history. Outside, protesters held signs. Some demanded justice, others screamed for mercy. But inside, in that suffocating room that smelled of old wood and sweat, there was only one voice that mattered. And it was about to shatter everything. Thomas Calloway, the judge said, his voice steady and cold, "You have been found guilty of the murders of Richard and Margaret Calloway. This court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, the crack of the gavel trying to restore order. But none of that mattered to the boy standing between two armed deputies. Thomas Calloway, 17 years old, thin, pale, eyes dark and hollow like he hadn't slept in weeks. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He just stared at the judge with a look that could freeze blood. "No," Thomas said quietly at first. Then, louder, "No, I'm not going to prison." The deputies grabbed his arms, but he jerked away, his voice rising to a scream that silenced the entire room. "I'm not going to prison." And that's when everything went wrong. Thomas lunged forward, his hand moving faster than anyone expected. A small blade, no, longer than a finger, flashed in the fluorescent light. He'd hidden it, God knows how. But there it was, glinting as he slashed toward the bench, toward the judge who had just sealed his fate. Chaos. Deputies tackled him to the floor. The blade clattered across the tile. People screamed. The judge stumbled back, wide-eyed, his hand clutching his chest even though the blade hadn't touched him. Reporters scrambled for their cameras. Attorneys dove behind tables. And Thomas was screaming, thrashing, his voice cracking as they pinned him down. "You don't understand, you don't know what." They did. They dragged him out. His voice echoed down the hallway long after the doors slammed shut. The cameras captured every second. That moment, that single violent outburst, became the defining image of the Calloway case. It played on every news channel. It went viral. It became a meme, a soundbite, a symbol of rage and guilt and everything wrong with a boy who had murdered the only parents he'd ever known. But here's the thing. That moment, that wasn't the beginning. Not even close. 6 months earlier, the Winters family lived in a quiet neighborhood in a small town called Ridgemont, about 40 miles outside of Portland, Oregon. Tree-lined streets, well-kept lawns, the kind of place where people still waved at their neighbors and kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on. Richard and Margaret Calloway, everyone called them Rick and Maggie, had lived there for over a decade. They were pillars of the community. Rick worked as an accountant at a local firm. Maggie volunteered at the church and taught piano lessons from their home. They were kind, patient, predictable, and they had adopted Thomas when he was 7 years old. No one knew much about where Thomas came from. The Calloways kept that part of his life private, which people respected. Adoption was a sensitive subject after all. What mattered, everyone said, was that the boy had a good home now. A second chance. Thomas was quiet, polite. He got decent grades, played soccer for a while, spent most of his time reading or sketching in a notebook he carried everywhere. He didn't have many friends, but that wasn't unusual for a kid who'd been through trauma. Maggie used to say he just needed time. "He'll come out of his shell," she'd tell her neighbors with a warm smile. "He just needs to feel safe." But there were whispers. Not many, just enough. Whispers about how Thomas didn't seem to laugh much, how he never hugged his parents in public, how sometimes, late at night, neighbors would hear raised voices coming from the Calloway house, muffled arguments that stopped as quickly as they started. Still, every family had their moments, right? In the weeks leading up to the murders, those whispers got louder. A teacher at Thomas's high school noticed bruises on his arms. When she asked, he said he'd fallen off his bike. She didn't believe him, but she didn't press. A clerk at the Local grocery store saw Maggie and Thomas together one afternoon. She said later that Maggie's smile seemed forced, that Thomas looked empty, like he wasn't even there, she told police later. Then there was the incident at the church fundraiser. It was a Saturday in early October. The whole town turned out. There were games, raffles, baked goods. Rick and Maggie were there, of course, smiling and shaking hands. Thomas stood off to the side, hands shoved in his pockets, staring at the ground. A woman named Claire Brennan, a family friend, approached him. She tried to make conversation, asked him how school was going. Thomas barely looked at her. "Fine," he muttered. "You okay, sweetie?" she asked gently. He looked up then, and for just a second, she said, she saw something in his eyes, something cold, something that made her take a step back. "I'm fine," he said again. Then he walked away. Claire never forgot that look. The night it happened was October 14th, a Friday. Rick and Maggie had been out earlier that evening at a neighborhood meeting. They came home around 8:30. Thomas was already in his room, door closed, music playing softly. Nothing unusual. Around 9, Maggie made tea. Rick settled into his recliner with the evening news. The house was calm, quiet. At 10:47 p.m., a neighbor 3 houses down, a retired nurse named Patricia Henley, heard screaming. Not yelling, screaming. She said it sounded like someone was being torn apart. She called 911. By the time police arrived, it was too late. Rick Calloway was found in the living room, slumped against the wall near the fireplace. Multiple stab wounds. His glasses were shattered on the floor beside him. His hands were covered in defensive wounds. Maggie Calloway was in the hallway leading to the bedrooms. She'd been trying to run. The coroner would later confirm that she'd been struck from behind first, then stabbed repeatedly as she tried to crawl away. The weapon was a kitchen knife from their own drawer. And Thomas was in the backyard, sitting on the porch steps, covered in blood. When the first officer approached him, Thomas didn't move, didn't speak. He just sat there staring at his hands, his face blank. "Son," the officer said carefully. "What happened here?" Thomas looked up slowly. "I don't know," he whispered. "They arrested him on the spot. There was no one else in the house. No sign of forced entry. No evidence of a struggle with anyone other than the 2 victims. The blood on Thomas's clothes, his hands, his face, it all belonged to Rick and Maggie. The knife was found in the kitchen sink, washed, but not well enough. His fingerprints were all over." At the station, Thomas refused to speak without a lawyer. When one finally arrived, a public defender named Aaron Grant, Thomas gave the same answer over and over. "I don't remember. I blacked out. I don't know what happened." The police didn't believe him. Neither did the prosecutor. And 6 months later, neither did the jury. But here's what the cameras didn't show. Here's what the reporters didn't dig into. Here's what the public, hungry for a villain, for a clear story, for someone to blame, never stopped to ask. What if Thomas was telling the truth? What if he really didn't remember? And if he didn't, then who did? Narrator's voice calm and deliberate. At the time, no one questioned the narrative. A troubled adopted kid, a violent outburst, a family torn apart. It all made sense. But in the quiet town of Ridgemont, nothing is ever as simple as it seems. And the Calloway house? It had secrets, the kind that don't die with their keepers. The Calloway house sat at the end of Maple Street, a 2-story colonial with pale blue shutters and a wraparound porch. In the spring, Maggie's flower beds exploded with color. Tulips, daffodils, roses climbing the white lattice fence. In the fall, Rick would rake the leaves into perfect piles, only for the neighborhood kids to scatter them again. It was the kind of house you'd see on a postcard, the kind of house that promised safety. But as the old saying goes, every house has doors that never open. Narrator's voice. In the months, before the murders, the Calloways seemed like the perfect family. But perfection is fragile. And in Ridgemont, where everyone knew everyone, Even the smallest cracks didn't stay hidden for long. Let's go back. Back to when things still looked normal. Back to when Thomas Calloway was just another teenager trying to survive high school. Back to when Rick and Maggie were still alive, 3 months before the murders, July. Thomas woke every morning at 6:15. Not because he wanted to, because he had to. Maggie believed in routine, structure. She'd told him that 100 times since he was 7 years old. Routine builds character, Thomas. It teaches discipline. So every morning the alarm went off at 6:15. He'd shower, dress, and be downstairs by 6:45. Breakfast was always the same: scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice. Maggie cooked. Rick read the newspaper at the head of the table. Thomas sat across from him, silent, pushing food around his plate. They didn't talk much in the mornings. Rick wasn't a big talker anyway. He was a numbers guy, precise, methodical. He liked things in order. Bills paid on time. Lawn mowed every Saturday. Dishes done immediately. After dinner. Maggie, on the other hand, filled the silence with pleasantries. Sleep well, sweetheart? Big plans today? Don't forget you have piano practice at 4. Thomas would nod, murmur something vague. Go back to his eggs. To an outsider, it might have looked like a typical family breakfast. But if you looked closer, if you really paid attention, you'd notice the tension, the way Thomas never made eye contact, the way Maggie's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, the way Rick's jaw tightened whenever Thomas was late to the table. Thomas attended Ridgemont High, a small school, with about 400 students. He was a junior that year, 17, quiet, kept to himself mostly. He didn't play sports anymore. He'd quit soccer freshman year after an argument with the coach. He wasn't in any clubs, didn't go to parties, didn't have a girlfriend. He had one friend, though, a kid named Ethan Marsh. Ethan was the opposite of Thomas. Loud, funny, always getting into trouble for talking too much in class. He lived 2 streets over and had known Thomas since middle school. They weren't close exactly, but they ate lunch together most days and sometimes hung out after school. You're weird, man, Ethan would say with a grin. But you're cool weird. Thomas never knew how to respond to that. One afternoon in late July, they were sitting on the bleachers behind the school, killing time before Ethan's mom picked him up. Ethan was scrolling through his phone, showing Thomas memes. Thomas was sketching in his notebook, a habit he'd had for years. He drew landscapes mostly, empty fields, forests, places with no people. Dude, you ever gonna show me what you draw? Ethan asked, craning his neck to see. Thomas closed the notebook. It's nothing. Come on, don't be like that. I said it's nothing. Ethan shrugged and went back to his phone. A few minutes passed in silence. Then, out of nowhere, Ethan asked, You doing okay? Like, for real? Thomas looked up. What? I don't know, man. You've just been off lately. I'm fine. You sure? Because you look like you haven't slept in a week. Thomas didn't answer. Ethan studied him for a moment, then sighed. Look, if something's going on at home or whatever, you can talk to me. You know that, right? Thomas stared at the horizon, his jaw tight. There's nothing going on, he said finally. But that wasn't true. And Ethan knew it. At home, things were getting harder to ignore. Rick had always been strict, but lately he'd become something else. Controlling. Critical. He monitored everything Thomas did. His grades, his schedule, who he talked to. He'd installed parental controls on Thomas's phone and laptop, limiting his access to the internet. He checked his search history, his messages. It's for your own good, Rick would say. You need guidance. Thomas hated it, but he didn't argue, not anymore, because arguing with Rick never ended well. One evening in early August, Thomas came home 10 minutes late from Ethan's house. He'd lost track of time. It happened. But Rick was waiting in the living room when he walked in. You're late, Rick said without looking up from his newspaper. I know, sorry. Lost track of... What did I tell you about being on time? Thomas hesitated. That it's disrespectful. That's right. It's disrespectful to me, to your mother, to this household. I said I'm sorry. Rick set the paper down slowly. He looked at Thomas with that cold, measured stare that made Thomas feel like he was being examined under a microscope. Go to your room, Rick said. No. Dinner tonight. Thomas's stomach twisted. He hadn't eaten since lunch. Rick, Now. Thomas turned and walked upstairs. He didn't slam the door. He'd learned not to. Maggie was complicated. She wasn't cruel like Rick could be. She was softer, kinder, on the surface. But there was something about her that felt off. She hovered, constantly. She'd knock on Thomas's door at odd hours, asking if he needed anything. She'd rearrange his things when he wasn't home, straightening his desk, folding his clothes, organizing his books. She said it was because she cared, but it felt invasive. One Saturday afternoon, Thomas came home from the library to find Maggie in his room, sitting on his bed, reading his notebook. His private notebook, the one he kept hidden under his mattress. Maggie, what are you? She looked up, startled but not guilty. Oh, sweetheart. I was just tidying up and I found this. I didn't realize you were such a talented artist. Thomas's chest tightened. That's private. I know, honey, but it's private, Maggie. You can't just... Don't raise your voice at me. Her tone shifted. Not loud, not angry, but sharp. Final. Thomas clenched his fists, his nails, digging into his palms. I'm sorry, he muttered. Maggie stood, smoothing her skirt. She set the notebook on his desk and smiled, that strange, tight smile she always wore when things got uncomfortable. It's okay, sweetheart. I just worry about you. That's all. She kissed his forehead and left. Thomas locked the door behind her. By September, the cracks were impossible to ignore. Neighbors started noticing things. Patricia Henley, the retired nurse who would later call 911, saw Maggie and Thomas arguing in the driveway one afternoon. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she saw the way Maggie gripped Thomas's arm, the way he yanked it away. A man named Dale Pritchard, who lived across the street, mentioned to his wife that he'd heard yelling from the Calloway house late one night. Not just raised voices, real yelling. Sounded like the kid, Dale said. He was shouting something. Couldn't make it out. Should we check on them? His wife asked. Dale shrugged. Not our business. At school, a teacher named Mrs. Ellison noticed Thomas falling asleep in class. When she asked if everything was okay at home, he gave her the same answer he gave everyone. I'm fine. But he wasn't. And deep down, Mrs. Ellison knew it. Then came the incident at the church fundraiser. It was early October. The whole town was there. Games, food, music. Rick and Maggie were in their element, smiling, shaking hands, playing the role of the perfect couple. Thomas stood off to the side, alone, hands in his pockets. Claire Brennan approached him. She was a friend of the family. Sweet woman. Always meant well. Hey, Thomas, she said warmly. How've you been? He barely looked at her. Fine. School going okay? Yeah. She studied him for a moment, her smile faltering. You sure? You're okay, honey. You look tired. Thomas finally looked up, and the look in his eyes, cold, empty, hollow, made her take a step back. I'm fine, he said again. Then he walked away. Claire stood there, uneasy, watching him disappear into the crowd. Narrator's voice. At the time, no one thought much of it. Teenagers are moody. Families argue. It's normal. But looking back now, people remember those moments differently. They remember the silence at the breakfast table, the tension in the driveway, the look in Thomas's eyes at the church. And they wonder, were those warning signs? Or were they something else entirely? 1 week before the murders, something strange happened. Thomas came home from school to find a note on his desk. It was in Maggie's handwriting. We need to talk tonight. All of us. It's important. Thomas stared at the note, his stomach sinking. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew it wasn't good. The note sat on Thomas's desk like a ticking bomb. We need to talk tonight. All of us. It's important. He read it 3 times, his hands shaking slightly. Maggie never left notes like this. If she wanted to talk, she'd just corner him in the hallway or knock on his door until he answered. But this felt different, formal, planned. Thomas shoved the note into his drawer and tried to focus on his homework, but the words blurred on the page. His mind raced through possibilities. Had they found something? Read something they weren't supposed to, or was this, or about something else entirely? Dinner that night was unbearable. Maggie had made pot roast, Thomas's least favorite, though she always insisted it was his favorite. Rick sat at the head of the table, cutting his meat into precise uniform pieces. Maggie smiled too much, her hands fluttering nervously. As she served the vegetables, Thomas pushed food around his plate, waiting. Finally, Rick set down his fork and cleared his throat. "Thomas, your mother and I have been talking." "Here it comes," Thomas thought. "We're concerned about you," Rick continued. "Your attitude lately, your grades, the way you've been isolating yourself." Thomas didn't respond. "We think," Maggie interjected gently, "that maybe you need some extra support. Someone to talk to." Thomas looked up. "Like what?" "A therapist," Rick said bluntly. "We've already made an appointment. First session is next Wednesday." Thomas's stomach dropped. "You can't be serious." "We're very serious," Rick said. "This isn't a negotiation. I don't need a therapist. That's not your decision to make." Thomas felt heat rising in his chest. "You can't just—" "We can," Rick interrupted, his voice hard. "And we will. You're 17 years old. You live under our roof. You follow our rules." Maggie reached across the table, trying to touch Thomas's hand. He pulled away. "Sweetheart, we're just trying to help." "I don't need help," Thomas said, his voice rising. "I need you to leave me alone." The silence that followed was suffocating. Rick's jaw tightened. His knuckles went white around his fork. "Go to your room," he said quietly. Thomas stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Gladly." He was halfway up the stairs when Rick's voice echoed from the dining room. "And Thomas, no phone tonight. Leave it on." "Leave it." "The kitchen counter." Thomas stopped, his hand gripping the banister. He wanted to scream, to throw something, to tell them exactly what he thought of their rules and their control and their suffocating fake concern. But he didn't. He walked back downstairs, set his phone on the counter without a word, and went to his room. He locked the door. And for the first time in a long time, he cried. Narrator's voice. Control. That's what it was really about. Rick and Maggie believed they were helping, guiding, protecting. But to Thomas, it felt like drowning. And in that house, there was no one to pull him to the surface. The next day at school, Thomas was a ghost. He sat through classes without hearing a word. At lunch, Ethan tried to make conversation, but Thomas barely responded. "Dude, seriously, what's going on?" Ethan finally asked, frustrated. Thomas stared at his tray. "Nothing." "That's bull. You've been weird all week." "I said it's nothing." Ethan leaned back, studying him. "Your parents giving you a hard time again?" Thomas didn't answer. Ethan sighed. "Man, you gotta talk to someone. Like, actually talk. This bottling it up thing isn't working." Thomas almost laughed. "Yeah, well, they're making me see a therapist now, so I guess that's covered." "Wait, really?" "Yep, Wednesday." "That sucks," Ethan said. Then more carefully, "But maybe, I don't know. Maybe it won't be the worst thing." Thomas looked at him, his expression unreadable. "Maybe," he said, but he didn't believe it. That afternoon, Thomas walked home alone. He took the long way, circling through the park, killing time before he had to go back to that house. He found himself sitting on a bench near the playground, watching younger kids chase each other across the wood chips. Their laughter echoed in the empty air. He used to come here when he was little, back when things were simpler, back when he still believed Rick and Maggie loved him. Now he wasn't sure what he believed. He pulled out his sketchbook, the one Maggie had violated, and started drawing. Not landscapes this time. Something darker, a house, empty windows, a door that wouldn't open. He didn't know why he drew it. but it felt right. When he finally got home, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Maggie's car was in the driveway, but she wasn't in the kitchen. Rick wasn't in the living room. Thomas called out, but no one answered. He climbed the stairs slowly, his nerves prickling. That's when he heard it. Voices, coming from the master bedroom, low, tense. Thomas stopped outside the door, his heart pounding. "Can't keep doing this," Maggie was saying. "It's not fair to him." "Fair?" Rick's voice was sharp. We took him in, gave him a home, a life, and this is how he repays us? He's just a kid, Rick. He's struggling. He's ungrateful, disrespectful, and if we don't get control of this situation now, it's going to get worse. There was a pause. Then Maggie, quieter now. "What if we're making it worse?" "Don't," Rick snapped. "Don't start doubting this now. We agreed, we made a commitment, and we're going to see it through." Thomas backed away from the door, his chest tight. He didn't know what they were talking about, but he knew it wasn't good. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over. We made a commitment. What did that mean? And why did it sound so final? Around midnight, he heard footsteps in the hallway. Soft, deliberate. They stopped outside his door. Thomas held his breath. The doorknob turned slightly, but the lock held. A pause. Then the footsteps moved away. Thomas didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning at breakfast, Maggie acted like nothing had happened. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said brightly, setting a plate of eggs in front of him. Thomas stared at her, searching her face for any sign of the conversation he'd overheard, but there was nothing. Just that same tight, artificial smile. Rick didn't even look up from his newspaper. Thomas ate in silence. At school, Thomas's mind was elsewhere. He barely registered when Mrs. Ellison called on him in English class. He mumbled some vague answer and went back to staring out the window. After class, she stopped him. "Thomas, can I talk to you for a second?" He turned, reluctant. "Yeah?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I've noticed you've been distracted lately. Is everything okay at home?" There it was again. That question. "I'm fine," Thomas said automatically. Mrs. Ellison didn't look convinced. "If you ever need to talk about anything, you can come to me, okay?" Thomas nodded, even though he knew he never would. "Okay." He left before she could say anything else. That afternoon, something happened that no one expected. Thomas was walking home when a car pulled up beside him, a silver sedan, tinted windows. The passenger window rolled down. Thomas stopped, his heart racing. A man leaned over from the driver's seat, mid-40s, suit and tie, clean cut. "Thomas Calloway?" the man asked. Thomas took a step back. "Who are you?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "My name's David Holt. I'm an old friend of your parents." "I don't know you." "No, you wouldn't. We lost touch years ago, but I heard through the grapevine that things have been tense at home." Thomas's blood went cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." David studied him for a long moment. "Listen, kid," he said finally. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just wanted to give you some advice." "I don't need advice." "Yeah, you do." David's voice dropped, serious now. "Whatever your parents are telling you, whatever they're planning, be careful. They're not who you think they are." Thomas's heart pounded. "What does that mean?" David glanced in his rearview mirror, like he was checking to see if anyone was watching. "Just be careful," he said again. Then the window rolled up and the car drove away. Thomas stood there, frozen, his mind racing. Who the hell was that? And what did he know? When Thomas got home, he went straight to his room. He locked the door and pulled out his laptop. Still restricted, still monitored. But he didn't care. He searched for David Holt. Nothing. At least nothing that matched the man he'd just met. He searched for any connection between that name and Rick or Maggie. Still nothing. Frustrated, Thomas slammed the laptop shut. He didn't know what was happening, But he knew one thing for sure. Something was very, very wrong. Narrator's voice. In every family, there are secrets. Small ones. Harmless ones. But in the Calloway house, the secrets ran deeper. And soon they would rise to the surface, whether Thomas was ready or not. That night, Thomas found something. He was looking for a charger in the hallway closet when he knocked over a box. On the top shelf, papers spilled everywhere. He knelt down to gather them, annoyed until he saw what they were. Adoption papers. His adoption papers. But something was wrong. The dates didn't match what he'd been told. The signatures looked off. And there, at the bottom of one page, half obscured by a coffee stain, was a name he didn't recognize. David Holt. Thomas's hands started shaking. He grabbed the papers and shoved them under his shirt, his heart pounding so loud he was sure someone would hear. He went back to his room, locked the door, and read every word. By the time he finished, his world had shifted. Nothing made sense anymore. Nothing was what he thought it was. And the people he called Mom and Dad, they'd been lying to him his entire life. Thomas sat on his bed, the adoption papers spread out in front of him like evidence at a crime scene. His hands were still shaking. He'd read them 3 times now, and each time the truth felt more impossible. The dates were wrong. The story he'd been told his whole life, about being adopted at 7 from a foster system in California, didn't match the documents. According to these papers, he'd been adopted at 9, and not from California, from somewhere in Oregon, a place called Harlow County, a place he'd never heard of. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the name at the bottom of the consent form. David Holt. The same man who'd pulled up beside him that afternoon. The same man who'd warned him. They're not who you think they are. Thomas's mind raced. Who was David Holt? A caseworker, a lawyer, family. And why had Rick and Maggie erased him from the story? Thomas grabbed his restricted laptop and tried searching again, this time for Harlow County adoption records. But the parental controls blocked him. He tried his phone, still confiscated downstairs. He was trapped. No answers, no way out. Just questions piling up like stones on his chest. Downstairs, he could hear Rick and Maggie moving around, the clink of dishes, the low murmur of the television. Normal sounds. But nothing felt normal anymore. Thomas shoved the papers under his mattress and lay back, staring at the ceiling. He had to confront them. He had to know the truth. But not tonight. Tonight, he just needed to think. Narrator's voice. October 14th started like any other day. Rick went to work. Maggie ran errands. Thomas went to school. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. Thomas knew too much now, and in the Calloway house, knowing too much was dangerous. That morning, Thomas barely spoke at breakfast. Maggie noticed. "You okay, sweetheart?" she asked, pouring orange juice. Thomas didn't look up. "Fine. You seem quiet." "I'm always quiet." Maggie exchanged a glance with Rick, who was reading the news on his tablet. "Thomas," Rick said without looking up, "don't forget, your therapy appointment is Wednesday, 4 o'clock. Don't make plans." Thomas clenched his jaw. "I know." "Good." Silence. Thomas finished his eggs, grabbed his backpack, and left without saying goodbye. Maggie watched him go, her smile fading. "He's getting worse," she said quietly. Rick set down his tablet. "Then it's a good thing we're handling it." "Are we?" Maggie's voice wavered. "Rick, what if—" "Don't, Rick." Interrupted, his tone sharp. "We've been over this. We made a decision. We stick to it." Maggie looked away, her hands twisting the dishcloth. "I just hope we're doing the right thing," she whispered. Rick didn't answer. At school, Thomas couldn't focus. He sat through first period in a daze. Second period was worse. By lunch, Ethan had noticed. "Okay, seriously, what's going on?" Ethan asked, sitting down across from him in the cafeteria. Thomas stared at his tray. "Nothing." "You've said that like 50 times this week. It's clearly not nothing." Thomas looked up, his eyes hollow. Drop it. Ethan. Dude, I said drop it. Ethan leaned back, frustrated. Fine, but you know where to find me when you're ready to talk. Thomas didn't respond. He spent the rest of lunch alone, his mind spinning. After school, Thomas didn't go home right away. Instead, he walked to the public library, a small, quiet building on the edge of town. He signed into one of the computers using a guest account and searched for everything he could find on Harlow County. It was a rural area about 60 miles north of Ridgemont. Small population. Not much there except farmland and a few scattered towns. He found an old news article from 12 years ago. The headline made his stomach drop. Harlow County Family Services under investigation for adoption irregularities. Thomas clicked the link, his heart pounding. The article was vague. Allegations of forged documents, falsified backgrounds, children, placed with families under questionable circumstances. The investigation had been dropped after a few months due to lack of evidence, but one name appeared multiple times in the piece: David Holt, former caseworker. Thomas sat back, his mind reeling. David Holt had been involved in his adoption, and something about it had been wrong. Wrong enough to investigate. Thomas printed the article, shoved it into his backpack, and left the library. He needed answers, and tonight, he was going to get them. When Thomas got home, the house felt different, heavier. Maggie was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She looked up when he walked in, her smile automatic. "Hey, sweetheart, how was school?" "Fine," Thomas said flatly. He set his backpack down and headed for the stairs. "Thomas, wait," Maggie called after him. "Can you set the table? Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. Thomas stopped, his hand on the banister. He turned slowly, looking at her, really looking at her. The way her hands trembled slightly as she chopped. The way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The way she avoided his gaze. "Who's David Holt?" Thomas asked. Maggie froze. The knife clattered onto, the cutting board. "What?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "David Holt," Thomas repeated, stepping closer. "Who is he?" Maggie's face went pale. "Where did you hear that name? Answer the question." "Thomas, She glanced toward the hallway like she was checking to see if Rick was home. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Maggie's hands were shaking now. She gripped the edge of the counter. "Thomas, please, don't what? Don't ask questions. Don't want to know the truth about my own life? It's not that simple." "Then make it simple." Thomas's voice rose, echoing through the kitchen. "Tell me the truth. Who is David Holt? Why is his name on my adoption papers? And why did you lie to me?" Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand," she whispered. "We were trying to protect you." "From what?" The front door opened. Rick stepped inside, briefcase in hand, his expression already darkening. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice cold. Thomas turned to face him, his chest heaving. "I know," Thomas said. "I know you've been lying to me." Rick's jaw tightened. He set his briefcase down slowly, deliberately. "Go to your room." "Thomas." "No." "Excuse me?" "I said no." Thomas's voice was steady now, but his hands were clenched into fists. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me the truth." Rick took a step forward, his eyes hard. "You're in my house. You follow my rules. Now go. To your room." "Or what?" Thomas shot back. "You'll ground me. Take away my phone again. Lock me in." The air in the room shifted. Maggie gasped softly. Rick's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Something dangerous. "Thomas," Maggie said, her voice trembling. "Please just go upstairs. We'll talk about this later." "No," Thomas said, his voice breaking now. "I'm done waiting. I'm done being lied to. I want the truth, right now." Rick stared at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "You want the truth?" Rick said quietly. "Fine. Sit down." They sat at the dining table. Rick At the head, Maggie across from Thomas, her hands folded in her lap, tears streaming down her face. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest. Rick leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "You're right," Rick said finally. "We lied to you." Thomas's breath caught. "We told you that you were adopted at 7 from a foster system in California. That wasn't true. You were 9, and you came from Harlow County." "Why?" Thomas's voice cracked. "Why lie?" Rick glanced at Maggie, who looked away. "Because the adoption wasn't standard," Rick continued. "There were complications. Legal complications. David Holt helped us navigate those complications. He made it possible for us to bring you home." "What kind of complications?" Rick hesitated. "Your biological parents," he said carefully, "didn't want to give you up." Thomas felt the floor tilt beneath him. "What?" "They fought the adoption," Rick said, "but they were deemed unfit. Dangerous, even. David helped us secure custody. But the process was messy, ugly. We didn't want you to grow up knowing that. We thought it would be easier if you believed you came from a system, clean, simple." Thomas stared at him, his mind racing. "That's why you erased him," Thomas said slowly. "That's why you changed the story." "We did what we thought was best," Maggie said, her voice thick with tears. "We wanted you to have a fresh start, a normal life." Thomas laughed bitterly. "Normal? You call this normal?" "Thomas." "No." Thomas stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to lie to me my whole life and then act like it was for my own good." "Sit down," Rick said, his voice hard again. "I'm done sitting." "Thomas, I'm done," Thomas shouted. "I'm done with your rules. And your control and your lies." Rick stood now too, his face darkening. "You watch your tone, or what?" Thomas stepped closer, his voice shaking. "What are you going to do, Rick? Lock me up? Get rid of me like you got rid of David Holt?" Maggie gasped. Rick's expression went ice cold. "Go to your room," he said quietly. "Now." Thomas didn't move. For a long moment they stood there, locked in a silent standoff. Then Thomas turned and walked toward the stairs. But before he reached them, he stopped. "I know you're hiding something," Thomas said without turning around. "And I'm going to find out what it is." He went upstairs, slammed his door, and didn't come out. Narrator's voice. "That night, the Calloway house was a powder keg. Everyone inside knew it, but no one knew how to defuse it, and by morning, it would be too late." Downstairs, Rick and Maggie sat in silence. Finally, Maggie spoke, her voice barely audible. "We have to tell him the rest." Rick didn't answer. "Rick," Maggie pressed, "he deserves to know." "He deserves nothing," Rick snapped. "We gave him everything. A home, a family, a life. And this is how he repays us? He's just a kid. He's a liability." The word hung in the air like a threat. Maggie's face crumpled. "Don't say that." Rick stood, his movements sharp and controlled. "I'm going out," he said. "I need to think." "Rick, please." But he was already gone. The door slammed behind him. Maggie sat alone in the dark, sobbing quietly. Upstairs, Thomas lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind was a storm. Your biological parents didn't want to give you up. They were deemed unfit, dangerous. Who were they? Where were they now? And why did Rick and Maggie seem so afraid of him knowing the truth? Thomas pulled out the adoption papers. Again, studying every line, every signature. That's when he saw it. A second name, partially redacted, but still visible if you looked close enough. Holt. M. Holt. Thomas's heart stopped. M. Holt. Margaret Holt. Maggie. Thomas stared at the name until his eyes burned. Margaret Holt. Maggie. His mind scrambled to make sense of it. The woman who had raised him, who called herself his mother, shared a last name with David Holt. The man who had processed his adoption. The man who had warned him. Were they related? Brother and sister? Husband and wife? Thomas's stomach turned. If Maggie's real last name was Holt, then why had she taken Rick's name? They were married, that made sense, unless she'd changed it before the marriage, unless she'd been hiding something even then. Thomas grabbed his laptop, trying again to search, but the parental controls blocked him at every turn. He slammed shut, frustrated, his breathing ragged. He needed to get out of this house. He needed answers. But it was almost 9 o'clock. He was locked in. His phone was still downstairs. He was trapped. Downstairs, Maggie sat in the living room, the television on but unwatched. She clutched a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rick. "Don't talk to him, not until I get back." Maggie closed her eyes, her hands trembling. She wanted to believe they were doing the right thing. She had to believe it. But the look on Thomas's face tonight, the anger, the betrayal, it had cracked something inside her. She set the mug down and walked slowly to the bottom of the stairs. She could see the light under Thomas's door. She wanted to go up there, to explain, to make him understand. But Rick's text flashed in her mind. Don't talk to him. Maggie turned away. She went to bed. And she prayed that morning would bring clarity. It didn't. Narrator's voice. October 14th, 10:47 p.m. The night the Calloway family fell apart. What happened in those final hours has been reconstructed from police reports, forensic evidence, and witness testimony. But even now, the truth remains fractured, because everyone involved remembered it differently, and some of them didn't remember it at all. Rick came home just after 10:30. Thomas heard the car pull into the driveway, heard the front door open and close, heard the low murmur of voices, Rick and Maggie talking in the kitchen. He pressed his ear to the door, trying to listen. "Can't keep doing this," Maggie was saying. "We don't have a choice," Rick replied, his voice tight. "He knows, Rick. He knows about David. He's going to find out the rest." "He won't." "How can you be so sure?" There was a pause. Then, "Rick, quieter now. Because I'll make sure of it." Thomas's blood ran cold. He backed away from the door, his heart pounding. "I'll make sure of it." What did that mean? At 10:47 p.m., Patricia Henley, 3 houses down, was getting ready for bed when she heard it. Screaming, not yelling, not arguing. Screaming, raw, desperate, terrified. She froze, her hand on the light switch, listening. It came from the direction of the Calloway house. Patricia grabbed her phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I think something's happening at my neighbor's house. I heard screaming. It sounded bad. What's the address? Patricia gave it, her voice shaking. Officers are on the way. Stay inside and keep your doors locked. Patricia hung up and moved to the window. The Calloway house was dark except for one light upstairs. She waited, watched, and prayed she was overreacting. The first officer on the scene was Deputy Mark Sandoval. He'd been patrolling nearby when the call came in. He pulled up to the Calloway house at 10:52 p.m. His partner, Deputy Lisa Chen, right behind him. The house was quiet now. Too quiet. Sandoval approached the front door, his hand resting on his sidearm. He knocked. "Ridgemont Police. Anyone home?" No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Chen circled around to the back of the house, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. That's when she saw him, Thomas, sitting on the back porch steps, covered in blood. "Mark," she called. "Back here." Sandoval came running. They both stopped when they saw the boy. Thomas sat perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees, his clothes soaked dark red. His face was blank, empty. "Son," Chen said carefully, her hand moving to her weapon. "Are you hurt?" Thomas didn't respond. Sandoval moved closer, his radio crackling. "Dispatch, we need backup and medical at this location. Possible 10-54. Possible homicide." "Thomas," Chen said again, kneeling a few feet away. "Can you hear me? Are you injured?" Slowly, Thomas looked up. His eyes were hollow. "I don't know," he whispered. "Chen's Stomach dropped. You don't know if you're hurt? Thomas shook his head slowly. I don't know what happened. Sandoval moved past him, entering the house through the back door. What he found inside would haunt him for the rest of his life. Rick Calloway was in the living room, slumped against the wall near the fireplace, his legs splayed out in front of him. His shirt was drenched in blood. His glasses were shattered on the floor beside him. Sandoval knelt down, checking for a pulse. Nothing. He keyed his radio, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. One victim down. Adult male, multiple stab wounds. No pulse. He moved deeper into the house. The hallway leading to the bedrooms was worse. Maggie Calloway lay face down near the stairs. She'd been trying to run. The blood trail behind her told the story. She'd been struck from behind, then stabbed repeatedly as she tried to crawl away. Sandoval closed his eyes for a moment, forcing himself to stay professional. Second victim, adult female, same condition. He stepped carefully around the body, scanning the rest of the house. No one else. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of a struggle with anyone other than the two victims. He walked back outside where Chen was still with Thomas. Is he hurt? Sandoval asked. Chen shook her head. I don't think so. The blood doesn't appear to be his. Sandoval looked at Thomas, still sitting there, staring at nothing. Thomas Calloway? Sandoval said. Thomas blinked slowly. I need you to stand up and put your hands behind your back. Thomas didn't move. Son, I need you to stand up, now. Chen helped him to his feet. Thomas didn't resist. Sandoval cuffed him, reading him his rights in a calm, steady voice. Thomas said nothing. He just stood there, swaying slightly, as more police cars pulled up. As the scene flooded with lights and sirens and voices, as his entire world collapsed around him. At the station, Thomas sat in an interrogation room, still covered in blood. He hadn't spoken since they brought him in. Detective Laura Briggs entered. The room, a folder in her hand. She was in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed, no nonsense. She'd worked homicides for over a decade. She'd seen a lot. But this case felt different. She sat down across from Thomas, studying him. Thomas, she said gently, my name is Detective Briggs. I need to ask you some questions. Do you understand? Thomas stared at the table. Thomas, do you understand your rights? A slight nod. I need you to say it out loud. Yes, Thomas whispered. Briggs opened the folder. Crime scene photos, evidence logs. Can you tell me what happened tonight? Thomas didn't answer. Thomas, 2 people are dead. Your parents. I need you to help me understand what happened. I don't know, Thomas said, his voice barely audible. You don't know what happened? I don't remember. Briggs leaned forward. You don't remember anything? Thomas shook his head. Thomas, you were found. At the scene, covered in blood. The blood of your parents. You're going to have to give me more than I don't remember. Thomas's hands were shaking now. I blacked out, he said. I don't know what happened. I can't. His voice broke. Briggs watched him carefully. She'd seen guilty people cry before. She'd seen innocent people break down. But this felt different. Okay, Briggs said, softening her tone. Let's start from the beginning. What do you remember about tonight? Thomas closed his eyes. We had a fight, he said quietly. At dinner, about my adoption, about them lying. To me, what did they lie about? Everything, where I came from, who I am, who they are. Briggs made a note. What happened after the fight? I went to my room. I stayed there. I heard them talking downstairs. Then Rick came home. What time was that? I don't know. 10:30, maybe later. And then? Thomas's breathing quickened. I heard them arguing again. I heard Maggie say my name. I heard Rick say something about making sure I didn't find out. Find out what? I don't know. Thomas, I don't know. His voice rose, cracking. I went downstairs because I wanted answers. I wanted the truth. And then... He stopped. Briggs waited. And then what, Thomas? Thomas's face crumpled. I don't remember, he whispered. I swear to God I don't remember. 1 second I was in the hallway, and the next I was outside. And they were dead. Briggs sat back, studying him. Do you know where the weapon is? Thomas looked up, confused. What? The knife. Do you know where it is? I don't know. We found it in the kitchen sink, washed, but not well enough. Your fingerprints are all over it. Thomas's face went pale. That's not possible. It's not only possible, Thomas. It's fact. Thomas shook his head, his breath coming in short gasps now. I wouldn't. Then who did? I don't know. Briggs leaned forward, her voice firm but not unkind. Thomas, I want to believe you, but you have to give me something, because right now all the evidence points to you. Thomas looked at her, his eyes wide and desperate. I didn't kill them, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't, I swear. Briggs held his gaze for a long moment. Then she stood. We'll talk more later. For now, sit tight. She left the room. Outside, her partner, Detective Ron Hayes, was waiting. What do you think? Hayes asked. Briggs crossed her arms, frowning. I think that kid's either the best liar I've ever met. She paused. Or he's telling the truth. Hayes raised an eyebrow. You really think he doesn't remember? Briggs glanced back at the interrogation room. I think something happened in that house tonight, she said quietly. Something we don't understand yet. Well, let's hope forensics gives us some answers. Briggs nodded, but deep down, she had a feeling this case was going to be a lot more complicated than anyone expected. Narrator's voice. By sunrise, the story had already spread. Troubled teen murders, adoptive parents in quiet suburban home. The media descended on Ridgemont like vultures. And Thomas Calloway, still sitting in that interrogation room, still covered in blood, became the monster everyone needed him to be. But the truth was buried. Somewhere in that house, and it was going to take a lot more than a confession to uncover it. Thomas spent the night in a holding cell. He didn't sleep. He sat on the thin mattress, his back against the cold concrete wall, staring at nothing. They'd given him clean clothes, gray sweatpants and a t-shirt, and bagged his blood-soaked outfit as evidence. Evidence against him. He kept replaying the night over and over, trying to remember. The argument at dinner, going to his room, hearing Rick come home, the muffled voices downstairs, and then nothing. A blank space where his memory should be. He remembered being outside, sitting on the porch steps, feeling cold, wet, looking down and seeing red. But everything in between was gone, erased, like someone had taken a knife to his brain and cut out the pieces they didn't want him to see. That morning, Detective Briggs sat in her office, surrounded by case files and crime scene photos. The forensic report had come in overnight. She read it slowly, highlighting key details. Victim 1, Richard Calloway, male, 48, cause of death, multiple stab wounds to the chest and abdomen, defensive wounds on hands and forearms. Time of death, approximately 10:45 p.m. Victim 2, Margaret Calloway, female, 46, cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head followed by multiple stab wounds to the back and torso. Evidence suggests she was struck first, then stabbed while attempting to flee. Time of death, approximately 10:40 to 10:50 p.m. Weapon, kitchen knife recovered from scene. Blood and tissue samples match both victims. Fingerprints recovered belong to Thomas Calloway. Briggs frowned. The timeline bothered her. If the 911 call came in at 10:47 p.m. and the screaming had been going on for at least a minute or two before that, then the murders happened fast. Brutally fast, Rick first, Maggie second. But there was something else in the report that caught her attention. Discrepancy noted. Time of death estimate for Victim 1, Richard Calloway, suggests death occurred between 10:30–10:35 p.m. Witness testimony places screaming at approximately 10:45 p.m. Possible gap of 10–15 minutes unaccounted for. Briggs underlined it twice. 10 to 15 minutes. What happened in that gap? She walked down to the holding cells. Thomas was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. "Thomas," Briggs said. "Through the bars." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "I need to ask you some more questions." Thomas nodded slowly. Briggs unlocked the cell and led him back to the interrogation room. "Thomas, I want to go over the timeline again," Briggs said, sitting across from him. "You said Rick came home around 10:30? I think so, I didn't check the time. But you heard him come in?" "Yes." "And you heard him and Maggie talking?" Thomas nodded. "What were they talking about?" Thomas hesitated. "Me. The adoption. They said I was finding out too much. Rick said he'd make sure I didn't find out the rest." Briggs made a note. "And that didn't alarm you?" "Of course it did." "So, what did you do?" "I stayed in my room. I was trying to figure out what to do. I was scared." "Scared of what?" Thomas looked down. "Scared of them." Briggs leaned forward. "Why were you scared of them, Thomas?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because they'd been lying to me my whole life," he said finally, "and I didn't know what else they were capable of." Briggs studied him. "Thomas, the forensic report says your father died around 10:30. Maybe 10:35 at the latest, but the neighbor didn't hear screaming until almost 11. That's a gap of 10, maybe 15 minutes. Can you explain that?" Thomas shook his head. "I don't know. I told you I don't remember." "You don't remember going downstairs?" "No." "You don't remember picking up the knife?" "No." "You don't remember stabbing your father? Your mother?" Thomas's face twisted in anguish. "No, I don't remember any of it." Briggs sat back. She believed him, or at least she believed he believed himself, but belief wasn't evidence. "Thomas, I'm going to be straight with you. Right now, everything points to you. Your prints on the weapon, your presence at the scene. No signs of anyone else being involved. If you don't give me something, anything that can explain what happened, this case is going to go one way, and it's not going to end well for you." Thomas's hands were shaking. "I didn't kill them," he whispered. "I swear, Briggs wanted to believe him, but she needed more. Later that afternoon, Briggs and Hayes drove out to Harlow County. It was a long shot, but the name David Holt kept appearing in Thomas's story. And if Maggie's maiden name really was Holt, then there had to be a connection. They pulled into a small town called Millbrook, barely more than a gas station, a diner, and a few houses scattered along a two-lane road. The county records office was in a squat brick building next to the post office. Inside, a woman in her 60s sat behind a desk, reading a paperback. "Help you?" she asked without looking up. "Detective Briggs, Ridgemont PD. I'm looking for adoption records from about 10 years ago. Name's Thomas Calloway." The woman set down her book and squinted at Briggs over her glasses. "That's a closed file. I have a warrant." Briggs slid the paperwork across the desk. The woman sighed, stood, and disappeared into a back room. She returned 10 minutes later with a thin folder. "This is all we've got," she said. "Not much in there. Most of it was sealed." Briggs opened the folder. Inside were a few official forms: birth certificate, placement paperwork, consent forms, and there at the bottom of one page was the name she'd been looking for. Caseworker David Holt. But there was something else. A second document, partially redacted. It was a petition to terminate parental rights, filed by Margaret Ann Holt, not as the adoptive parent, as the biological mother. Briggs felt her stomach drop. She looked up at Hayes, who'd been reading over her shoulder. "Jesus," Hayes muttered. Briggs flipped to the next page. There was a note, handwritten in faded ink. "Adoption finalized under emergency circumstances. Birth mother deemed unfit. Child placed with legal. Guardian Richard Calloway. Caseworker notes, significant irregularities in original custody arrangement. Further review recommended." But there was no further review. The file just ended. "What does this mean?" Hayes asked. Briggs closed the folder, her mind racing. It means, she said slowly, that Maggie Calloway wasn't Thomas's adoptive mother. She paused. She was his biological mother. Back at the station, Briggs laid out the new information for her captain, a grizzled veteran named Tom Ruiz. Ruiz listened, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "So let me get this straight," he said when she finished. The woman Thomas thought was his adoptive mother was actually his birth mother, and she gave him up, then took him back years later under a fake adoption? That's what it looks like. Why? I don't know. But David Holt was involved. He processed the adoption. And, according to this, Briggs tapped the file, there were significant irregularities. Ruiz rubbed his face. This just got a hell of a lot more complicated. Yeah. Does the kid know? Not yet. Ruiz sighed. You need to tell him, and we need to find this David Holt. If he's still alive, he might have answers. Briggs nodded. But even as she left the captain's office, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something. Something big. That evening, Briggs returned to the interrogation room. Thomas looked up when she entered, his face pale and drawn. "Thomas," Briggs said, gently, sitting down. "I need to tell you something, and it's going to be hard to hear." Thomas's throat tightened. "What?" Briggs took a breath. "We found your adoption records, the original ones." Thomas waited. "Maggie Calloway. She wasn't your adoptive mother." Thomas frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" "She was your biological mother, Thomas." The room went silent. Thomas stared at her, his brain struggling to process the words. "That's not possible," he said finally. "It is. We have the records. She gave you up when you were young. Then, years later, she and Rick took you back, but they lied about it. They made it look like a standard adoption." Thomas shook his head, his breathing quickening. No, that doesn't make sense. She would have told me. She didn't tell you," Briggs said softly, "and we don't know why." Thomas stood abruptly, the chair scraping. "Beck, you're lying." "I'm not." "You have to be. She couldn't." His voice broke. Briggs stood, moving carefully toward him. "Thomas, I know this is a lot, but I need you to stay calm." "Calm?" Thomas laughed bitterly, tears streaming down his face. "My entire life is a lie, everything. I thought I knew, everyone I thought I was, it's all fake. And you want me to stay calm? I know." "You don't know," Thomas shouted. "You don't know anything." He sank to the floor, his head in his hands, sobbing. Briggs knelt beside him. "Thomas," she said quietly, "I'm going to find out the truth. I promise. But I need you to trust me." Thomas looked up, his eyes red and swollen. "Why should I trust anyone?" he whispered. Briggs didn't have an answer for that. Narrator's voice. The truth, as it turned out, was buried deep, buried under years of lies, forged documents, and secrets too. Dangerous to speak aloud, but piece by piece it was beginning to surface, and when it did, it would shatter everything, not just for Thomas, but for everyone who thought they knew the Calloway family. That night, Detective Hayes made a breakthrough. He'd been running background checks on David Holt and finally found a current address, a small apartment in Portland. Briggs and Hayes drove out the next morning. The building was old, run down. They climbed 3 flights of stairs and knocked on the door marked 3C. A man in his late 40s opened it, thin, graying, tired eyes. "David Holt?" Briggs asked. The man's face went pale. "Who's asking?" Briggs showed her badge. "Detective Briggs, Ridgemont PD. We need to talk about Thomas Calloway." David closed his eyes. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he said quietly. He stepped aside. "Come in." David Holt's apartment was small and cluttered. Stacks of books lined the walls. Papers covered the dining table. A half-empty coffee mug sat on the counter, cold. He gestured for Briggs and Hayes to sit on a worn couch, then took a seat across from them in a faded armchair. He looked tired, defeated, like a man who'd been carrying a heavy secret for far too long. I knew this day would come, David said quietly. I just didn't think it would be like this. Briggs leaned forward. Mr. Holt, we need to know everything. About Thomas, about Maggie, about the adoption. David rubbed his face. Where do I start? The beginning. David was silent for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. Then he began. Margaret, Maggie was my sister, David said, younger by 3 years. We grew up in Harlow County, small town, not much opportunity. Our parents died when we were young, car accident. We were put into foster care. Got separated. He paused, his jaw tight. Maggie had a rough time, bounced between homes. Some of them were bad. By the time she aged out of the system, she was a mess, angry, self-destructive. She got pregnant at 19. The father, some guy she barely knew, took off the second he found out. Briggs made notes. Hayes listened intently. She had the baby, David continued, a boy, Thomas. But she wasn't ready to be a mother. She was barely keeping herself together, so she gave him up, put him in the system. But she took him back, Briggs said. David nodded. Years later, after she met Rick. How did that happen? David's expression darkened. Rick was different, controlling. He had money, stability. Maggie thought he could give her the life she'd never had. They got married. She told him about Thomas. And Rick. David shook his head. Rick saw an opportunity. What kind of opportunity? Hayes asked. A tax break, a dependent, someone to mold into the perfect son. David's voice was bitter. Rick didn't want a kid. He wanted a project. And Maggie went along with it because she thought she owed Thomas, thought she could fix her mistake. So they adopted him, Briggs said. Illegally, David corrected. Maggie's parental rights had been terminated. Legally, she couldn't just take him back. But Rick found a way. He falsified documents, bribed people. And because I worked in the system, he pulled me in. Briggs's eyes narrowed. You helped them? David looked away, shame written across his face. I was broke, desperate. Rick offered me money, a lot of money. And Maggie begged me, said Thomas deserved a real home, that she could give him that now. But you knew it was wrong, Hayes said. Of course I knew, David snapped. But I did it anyway. I forged the paperwork, made it look legitimate, and for a while it worked. Until it didn't, Briggs said. David nodded. The state started asking questions. There was an investigation. I got fired, almost went to jail. But Rick had connections. He made it go away. And the adoption stood. Briggs leaned back, processing. So Thomas never knew, she said. No, they told him he was adopted from foster care, clean slate, new family. But it was all a lie. And you? Hayes asked. Why didn't you say something? David's voice cracked. Because I was ashamed, and because Rick threatened me. Said if I ever talked, he'd make sure I ended up in prison. Briggs studied him. Why did you approach Thomas a few days ago? David looked up, surprised. How did you? Thomas told us. You pulled up next to him, warned him, told him his parents weren't who he thought they were. David exhaled slowly. Because I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I saw the news, saw how they were treating him, the control, the manipulation. It was eating me alive. I thought if I warned him, maybe he could get out before it was too late. But you were too late, Briggs said quietly. David's eyes filled with tears. No. Briggs and Hayes left the apartment an hour later, their heads spinning. You believe him? Hayes asked as they drove back to Ridgemont. I do, Briggs said. But it doesn't change the facts. Thomas's prints are on the knife. He was at the scene, and he can't explain what happened. Maybe he really doesn't remember. Or maybe he's lying. Hayes glanced at her. You don't believe that. Briggs didn't answer. Back at the station, the case was gaining momentum. The media had descended on Ridgemont like a swarm. News vans lined the streets. Reporters camped outside the police station, shouting questions at anyone who walked by. The story had gone national. Adopted teen murders parents in brutal attack. Family secrets uncovered in Oregon double homicide. Was Thomas Calloway a victim or a killer? Public opinion was divided. Some saw a troubled kid who'd been pushed too far. Others saw a cold-blooded murderer who'd killed the only people who'd ever cared about him. Inside the station, Briggs reviewed the evidence again. The knife, the blood, the timeline. And then there was the journal. Forensics had found it in Thomas's room, hidden under his mattress, along with the adoption papers. Briggs opened it carefully, flipping through the pages. Most of it was drawings, landscapes, dark, empty places. But toward the end, there were words, entries. Briggs read them slowly, her chest tightening. September 10th. They're watching me, I can feel it. Even when I'm alone, I'm not alone. Rick checks my phone. Maggie goes through my things. They say it's because they care. But it doesn't feel like care. It feels like control. September 22nd. I had another nightmare. The same one. I'm in a room I don't recognize. There's a woman crying, a man yelling. And I'm small. So small. I can't move. Can't breathe. I wake up and Maggie's standing in my doorway, just watching. She says she heard me screaming, but I don't remember screaming. October 5th. I found something today. Papers. Adoption papers. But the names don't match. The dates don't match. Nothing makes sense. Who? Is David Holt? Why is his name on my file? And why does Maggie look so scared when I ask about him? October 12th. I confronted them tonight. Told them I know they've been lying. Rick got angry. Really angry. He said I don't know what I'm talking about. That I should be grateful, but I'm not grateful. I'm trapped, and I don't know how to get out. The final entry was dated October 14th, the day of the murders. October 14th. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not. I need answers. I need the truth. Even if it destroys everything, I'm going to confront them. Tonight, all of it. The adoption. David. Maggie's real name, everything. I don't know what's going to happen, but I can't live like this anymore. Briggs closed the journal, her heart heavy. This wasn't the writing of a killer. This was the writing of a kid who was drowning. But did that make him innocent? Or did it give him motive? That afternoon, Briggs brought the journal into the interrogation room. Thomas looked up when she entered, his face hollow. I found this in your room, Briggs said, setting it on the table. Thomas stared at it. You read it, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. I did. Thomas looked away. Thomas, the last entry. You wrote that you were going to confront them, that you needed the truth. I did confront them, Thomas said, his voice flat. At dinner. You already know that. But it didn't end there, did it? Thomas didn't answer. Thomas, you wrote that you didn't know what was going to happen. What did you mean by that? Thomas's hands clenched into fists. I meant exactly what I said. I didn't know. I still don't. Briggs leaned forward. The journal makes it sound like you were desperate, angry, maybe even dangerous. Thomas looked at her, his eyes blazing. You think I killed them because I was angry? I think you were pushed to your limit, and I think something snapped. I didn't kill them, Thomas said through gritted teeth. Then who did? Thomas slammed his hands on the table, standing abruptly. I don't know. Briggs didn't flinch. Then help me figure it out. That evening, a new witness came forward. A neighbor named Dale Pritchard. He'd been out walking his dog the night of the murders, around 10:20 p.m., and he'd seen something. Briggs and Hayes met him at his house. Mr. Pritchard, Briggs said, you told the officers you saw something unusual that night? Dale nodded. Yeah, I was walking past the Calloway house, and I saw someone in the yard. Briggs's pulse quickened. Who? I don't know. It was dark, but it wasn't Thomas. Too tall, too broad. Hayes exchanged a glance with Briggs. Are you sure? Hayes asked. Positive. I know what Thomas looks like. This wasn't him. Can you describe the person you saw? Dale frowned, thinking. Like I said, it was dark, but I'd say male, maybe 6 feet, wearing a jacket, dark-colored. Did you see where he went? No, I kept walking, didn't think much of it until I heard what happened. Briggs made notes, her mind racing. Mr. Pritchard, why didn't you come forward sooner? Dale looked uncomfortable. I didn't want to get involved, but then I saw the news, saw that kid being crucified, and I thought, maybe what I saw matters. It does, Briggs said. Thank you. Back at the station, Briggs briefed the captain. If Pritchard's telling the truth, she said, then someone else was there that night. Or, Ruiz countered, he's mistaken. It was dark. He was far away. People see what they want to see. Or, Briggs said, Thomas is telling the, truth, and someone else killed Rick and Maggie. Ruiz sighed. You really think that's possible? Briggs hesitated. I don't know, she admitted, but I think we need to find out. Narrator's voice. The case was unraveling. Every answer led to more questions. Every witness contradicted the last. And in the middle of it all was a 17-year-old boy who claimed he couldn't remember. But the truth was out there, buried in the lies, waiting to be found. The story exploded. Within 48 hours, the Calloway case was everywhere. Cable news, social media, podcasts, true crime forums. Everyone had an opinion, and most of them had already decided Thomas was guilty. Narrator's voice. In the age of instant information, trials don't happen in courtrooms anymore. They happen online, in comment sections, in living rooms across the country. And Thomas Calloway, still sitting in a cell, still claiming he didn't remember, had already been convicted by the court of public opinion. But a few voices were beginning to question the narrative, and those voices were getting louder. It started with a podcast, a popular true crime show called Beyond Reasonable Doubt, dedicated an entire episode to the case. The host, a former defense attorney named Rachel Kim, laid out the evidence methodically, the timeline, the forensics, the witness testimony, and then she asked the question no one else was asking. What if Thomas Calloway is telling the truth? She pointed out the discrepancies. The 10 to 15-minute gap in the timeline. Dale Pritchard's statement about seeing someone else. The lack of any clear motive beyond teenage anger, which, she argued, didn't usually escalate to double homicide. This case, Rachel said in her calm, measured voice, isn't as open and shut as it seems, and I think the police know it. The episode went viral. Within days, the Justice for Thomas was trending on social media, but so was the Calloway culprit. The country was split. Meanwhile, the prosecution was building its case. District Attorney Monica Reeves was a formidable woman in her early 50s. Sharp, ruthless. She'd built her career on high-profile convictions, and she wasn't about to let this one slip away. She held a press conference outside the courthouse, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. The evidence in this case is overwhelming, Reeves said, her voice steady and confident. Thomas Calloway brutally murdered his parents in cold blood. His fingerprints are on the weapon. He was found at the scene covered in their blood. And despite his claims of memory loss, the facts speak for themselves. A reporter shouted, What about the witness who says he saw someone else? Reeves smiled thinly. Eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, especially in the dark. We believe Mr. Pritchard is mistaken. Our investigation has found no evidence of any third party. Another reporter. What about the adoption irregularities? The lies about Thomas's birth? Mother? Family dysfunction, Reeves said smoothly, does not excuse murder. If anything, it provides motive. Thomas discovered his parents had lied to him. He was angry, and he acted on that anger in the most violent way possible. She paused for effect. This was not a crime of passion. This was premeditated, calculated, and we will prove it in court. The press ate it up. Back at the station, Briggs watched the press conference with growing frustration. "She's already convicted him," Hayes muttered. "That's her job," Briggs said. "Ours is to find the truth. And what if the truth is that—" "He did it?" Briggs didn't answer, because she still wasn't sure. That afternoon, Thomas's public defender, Aaron Grant, finally got to meet with his client. Aaron was young, barely 30, overworked and underpaid. He carried a battered briefcase and looked like he hadn't slept in days. He sat across from Thomas in the visiting room, spreading files on the table. "Okay," Aaron said, "we need to talk strategy." Thomas looked up, his eyes dull. "What's the point?" "The point is you're facing life in prison. We need to build a defense." "A defense based on what?" "I can't remember anything." Aaron leaned forward. "Then we argue dissociative amnesia. Trauma-induced memory loss, there's precedent for it." "Will it work?" Aaron hesitated. "Honestly? Probably not. Juries don't like memory loss. It sounds like a convenient excuse." Thomas laughed bitterly. "So I'm screwed." "Not necessarily there. Our inconsistencies in the prosecution's case, the timeline, the witness who saw someone else, your lack of motive." "I had motive," Thomas interrupted. "They lied to me my whole life. The DA's right. I was angry." "Angry enough to kill them?" Thomas met his eyes. "I don't know." Aaron sat back, studying him. "Thomas, I need you to be honest with me. Is there any part of you, any part at all, that thinks you might have done it?" Thomas was quiet for a long time. "Sometimes," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper, "I think maybe I did. Maybe I blacked out and did something I can't take back. Maybe that's why I can't remember, because my brain is protecting me from the truth." Aaron's chest tightened. "And other times?" he asked gently. Thomas looked up, tears in his eyes. "Other times I know I didn't, because I remember being outside, and I remember feeling confused, lost, like I'd woken up from a nightmare. And that doesn't feel like guilt, it feels like something else." "Like what?" Thomas shook his head. "I don't know." The preliminary hearing was set for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, the media circus only grew. Talk shows debated the case. Legal analysts dissected every piece of evidence. Armchair detectives on Reddit and Twitter built elaborate theories. Some believed Thomas was innocent, a victim of a corrupt adoption system and abusive parents. Others believed he was a sociopath, a monster hiding behind a mask of confusion. One particularly popular theory suggested that Thomas had been planning the murders for months, that the journal entries were fake, written to establish an alibi. Another theory claimed Rick and Maggie were part of a larger conspiracy, that they'd trafficked children through illegal adoptions, and that Thomas had uncovered the truth and killed them to stop it. None of it was based on facts, but facts didn't matter anymore. The narrative was all that mattered, and the narrative was spinning out of control. On a cold morning in late October, a segment aired on a national morning show. The host, a polished woman in her Iowa 40s named Diane Foster, sat across from Claire Brennan, the family friend who'd spoken to Thomas at the church fundraiser. "Claire, you knew the Callaways well. What can you tell us about Thomas?" Claire looked uncomfortable, twisting a tissue in her hands. "He was quiet, withdrawn. I always thought he just needed time to adjust. But looking back now—" "Looking back now, what?" Diane pressed. Claire hesitated. There was something in his eyes, something cold. "I remember thinking at the time that it scared me." The audience murmured. "Do you think he's capable of what he's accused of?" Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. I want to believe he's not. But I also can't forget the way he looked at me that day. Like he wasn't even there." The segment went viral. Something cold trended for hours. Briggs watched the clip in her office, her jaw tight. "This is a circus," she muttered. Hayes nodded. "Welcome to the 21st century." Briggs's phone buzzed. A text from the forensic lab. She opened it. "New findings on blood spatter analysis. Call ASAP." She dialed immediately. The forensic tech, a woman named Dr. Linda Marsh, answered on the second ring. Detective E. Briggs, I think you need to see this. What did you find? The blood spatter patterns on Thomas's clothing don't match what we'd expect from someone actively stabbing two victims. Briggs's pulse quickened. What do you mean? The spatter is consistent with someone who was near the victims after. The fact, not during, it's transfer blood, not impact spatter. Meaning, Dr. Marsh said carefully. Thomas got blood on himself by touching the bodies or being in close proximity, not by stabbing them. Briggs closed her eyes. Are you sure? As sure as I can be. Of course, the prosecution will argue he cleaned up and changed clothes, but there's no evidence of that. No bloody clothes in the trash, no signs of washing, just the clothes he was wearing when we found him. Send me the full report, Briggs said, and keep this quiet for now. She hung up and turned to Hayes. The blood spatter doesn't match. Hayes's eyes widened. What? Thomas's clothes. The blood pattern suggests he was near the bodies after they died, not during the attack. So he didn't do it. Or, Briggs said slowly, he did it and then stood there, in shock, processing what he'd done. You don't believe that. I don't know what I believe anymore. That evening, Briggs drove back to the Calloway house. It was still cordoned off with police tape. She ducked under it and let herself in with the key forensics had left. The house was dark, silent. She stood in the living room where Rick had died. Then she walked to the hallway where Maggie had tried to run. She retraced the steps, the timeline. Rick first, stabbed in the living room, multiple wounds, defensive injuries. Maggie second, struck from behind, then stabbed as she crawled toward the stairs. 2 separate attacks, both brutal, both quick. But something bothered her. If Thomas had done this, where was the rage? The blood spatter suggested precision, control, not the frenzied attack of an angry teenager. Briggs walked upstairs to Thomas's room. It was untouched since the night of the murders. She looked around. The bed, the desk, the drawings on the wall. And then she saw it. Something she'd missed before. Tucked into the frame of Thomas's mirror was a photograph. An old one. Faded. Briggs pulled it out carefully. It showed a young woman, maybe early 20s, holding a baby. The woman was smiling, but her eyes looked sad. Briggs turned the photo over. On the back, in faded ink, was a single word. Forgive me. Briggs stared at it. This was Maggie, and the baby was Thomas. She slipped the photo into an evidence bag and left the house. Narrator's voice. The case was becoming a spectacle. A story told and retold by people who'd never met Thomas Calloway, who'd never stood in that house, who'd never felt the weight of the secrets buried in its walls. But the truth didn't care about ratings. It didn't care about trending hashtags. It cared about facts. And the facts were starting to point somewhere unexpected. The photograph haunted Briggs. She'd stared at it for hours, trying to decipher the emotion on young Maggie's face, the sadness, the regret, the desperate plea written on the back. Forgive me. For what? For giving him up? For taking him back under false pretenses? Or for something else entirely? Briggs needed answers, and she knew where to find them. The next morning, Briggs and Hayes sat in the office of Rick Calloway's former employer, a mid-sized accounting firm called Whitmore & Associates. The managing partner, a silver-haired man named Gerald Whitmore, sat across from them, his expression guarded. I still can't believe it, Gerald said, shaking his head. Rick was one of our best, meticulous, reliable. This whole thing is just unthinkable. Mr. Whitmore, Briggs said, we need to see Rick's financial records, both personal and professional. Gerald shifted. Comfortably. I'm not sure I can do that without a warrant. Hayes slid a document across the desk. Already got one. Gerald sighed. Of course you do. He stood and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out several folders. Rick handled accounts for about 30 clients, small businesses mostly. Nothing unusual, What about his personal finances? Briggs asked. Gerald hesitated. I don't have access to those. But you knew him well. Did he ever mention financial problems? Debts? Anything unusual? Gerald sat back down, frowning. Not that he told me, but about 6 months ago he asked for an advance on his salary, said he had unexpected expenses. How much? 20,000. Briggs exchanged a glance with Hayes. That's a lot of money, Hayes said. Gerald nodded. I thought so too. I asked what it was for, but Rick was vague, said it was a family matter. I gave him the advance. He paid it back within 3 months. How? Briggs asked. I assumed he'd sorted out whatever the issue was. I didn't pry. Briggs made a note. Did he seem stressed during that time? Gerald thought about it. Now that you mention it, yes. He was distracted, short-tempered, not himself. And after he paid it back? He seemed relieved, like a weight had been lifted. Briggs thanked Gerald and left with the files. Back at the station, Briggs and Hayes spread Rick's financial records across the conference table. Bank statements, credit card bills, investment accounts. And then they found it. A series of wire transfers, all from Rick's personal account, all to the same recipient, a company called Harlow Consulting Group. What the hell is Harlow Consulting? Hayes muttered. Briggs pulled out her laptop and searched. Nothing. No website. No business registration. No public records. It's a shell company, Briggs said. For what? That's what we need to find out. She cross-referenced the dates of the transfers with Rick's calendar and phone records. And then she saw it. The transfers started 8 years ago, right around the time Thomas was adopted, and they continued every month, like clockwork, until 3 months ago, when they stopped. He was paying someone, Hayes said slowly, for 8 years. And then he stopped, Briggs added. 3 months before he was killed. They stared at each other. Blackmail? Hayes suggested. Or hush money. For what? Briggs leaned back thinking. David Holt said the adoption was illegal, that Rick falsified documents. Maybe someone found out. Maybe someone was threatening to expose him. So Rick paid them off, for years, until he couldn't anymore. Or wouldn't, Briggs said. Maybe he decided he was done paying. Maybe he called their bluff. And they killed him for it. Briggs's heart raced. We need to find out who owns Harlow Consulting. It took 2 days, but they finally tracked it down. The company was registered in Delaware, a common tactic for hiding ownership. But with the help of a forensic accountant, they traced it back to a single individual, a man named Marcus Bellamy. Briggs ran the name, Marcus Bellamy, 53 years old, former social worker in Harlow County, fired 12 years ago during the adoption scandal, the same scandal that had taken down David Holt. Briggs's pulse quickened. Hayes, she said, I think we just found our blackmailer. Marcus Bellamy lived in a small house on the outskirts of Portland. Briggs and Hayes pulled up just after noon. Unmarked car, no sirens. Briggs knocked, no answer. She knocked again, louder. Still nothing. Hayes walked around to the back of the house, peering through windows. Briggs, he called. Back door's open. They drew their weapons and entered carefully. Portland PD, Briggs called. Anyone home? Silence. They moved through the house slowly. Living room, kitchen, hallway. And then they found him. Marcus Bellamy was in the bedroom, sitting in a chair by the window, dead. Single gunshot wound to the head. A revolver on the floor beside him. Briggs swore under her breath. Hayes checked for a pulse, already knowing what he'd find. He's gone. Looks like it's been a few days. Briggs scanned the room. On the desk was a laptop still open, and beside it a handwritten note. She pulled on gloves and picked it up carefully. The note was short, only a few lines. I can't do this anymore. I thought I was helping. I thought the money was justice. But it wasn't. It was just greed. I'm sorry. Briggs set the note down, her mind racing. She turned to the laptop. The screen was dark, but when she touched the keyboard, it came to life. An email was open, unsent, dated 3 days ago. The recipient line was blank, but the message wasn't. I know what you did. I know what Rick did. And I know about the boy. You think you can just stop paying and walk away? You think I'll let you destroy the evidence? I have copies. I have records. And if you don't pay what you owe, I'll go to the police. This is your last chance. Briggs read it twice, her chest tight. Hayes, she said quietly. This wasn't a suicide. Hayes looked, up. What? Briggs pointed to the email. This was sent 3 days before Rick was killed. Marcus was blackmailing him, threatening to expose the adoption fraud. So Rick killed him? Or someone else did, to tie up loose ends? Hayes frowned. But Rick's dead too. Exactly. They stared at each other. We're missing something, Briggs said. Someone else was involved. Someone who had just as much to lose as Rick. Maggie? Briggs shook her head. I don't think so. Maggie was a victim in this too. She gave up her son. Then she took him back illegally. She was being controlled by Rick. Then who? Briggs didn't have an answer. Not yet. They called in forensics and spent the next several hours combing through Marcus's house. What they found painted a disturbing picture. Files, documents, photographs, all related to illegal adoptions in Harlow County over a 10-year period. Rick and, Maggie's case was just one of many, but it was the most recent, and the most lucrative for Marcus. He'd been blackmailing them for 8 years, $60,000 total. But 3 months ago the payments stopped, and Marcus had escalated. The emails got more threatening, more desperate, until suddenly they stopped too. When did Marcus die? Briggs asked the forensic tech. The tech checked his notes. Estimated time of death is about 5 days ago. Give or take. Briggs did the math. 5 days ago was October 9th, 5 days before Rick and Maggie were killed. So, Marcus died first, Hayes said. Which means, Briggs said slowly, whoever killed Marcus also killed Rick and Maggie. But why? Briggs pulled out her phone and called David Holt. He answered on the 3rd ring. Mr. Holt, it's Detective Briggs. I need to ask you something. Did you know Marcus Bellamy? There was a pause. Yeah, David said quietly. We worked together, back in Harlow County. Did you know he was blackmailing Rick Calloway? Another pause, longer this time. I suspected, David admitted. Marcus called me a few months ago, said he had dirt on Rick, asked if I wanted in on it. I told him no. Told him to leave it alone, but he didn't. No, he didn't. Mr. Holt, Marcus is dead. Silence. What? David's voice cracked. He was found this morning. Gunshot wound, staged to look like suicide. David's breathing quickened. Oh God. Mr. Holt, do you know anyone else who might have been involved in the illegal adoptions? Anyone who had as much to lose as Rick? David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that made Briggs's blood run cold. There was one other person, someone who facilitated a lot of the placements. Someone with connections, money, influence. Who? His name is Jonathan Parrish. He's a lawyer, specializes in family law. He was the one who introduced Rick to the whole operation. Briggs wrote the name down. Where can I find him? He has an office in downtown Portland. But detective, what? Be careful. Jonathan's not someone you want to mess with. He has friends in high places, and he doesn't leave loose ends. Briggs hung up and turned to Hayes. We need to talk to Jonathan Parrish. Narrator's voice. Money. It always comes back to money. Not love, not family, not even justice. Just money. And the people willing to do terrible so. Things to protect it. Rick Calloway had been paying for his sins for 8 years, but when he tried to stop, the sins came for him. And now, the truth was closing in on everyone involved. Jonathan Parrish's office was on the 20th floor of a gleaming high-rise in downtown Portland. Briggs and Hayes stepped off the elevator into a lobby of polished marble and expensive art. A receptionist greeted them with a practiced smile. Do you have an appointment? Briggs showed her badge. "We need to speak with Mr. Parrish." "Now." The receptionist's smile faltered. "One moment." She picked up the phone, murmuring quietly. A minute later, a door opened and a man stepped out. Jonathan Parrish was in his late 50s. Tall, silver hair, expensive suit. The kind of man who commanded a room just by walking into it. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Detectives," he said smoothly. "How can I help you? We need to ask you some questions about Rick Calloway." Jonathan's expression didn't change. "Terrible tragedy. I heard about it on the news." "You knew him?" "Professionally, years ago. I handled some family law matters for him." "Like his son's adoption?" Jonathan's smile thinned. "That was a long time ago, and it was handled through proper channels." "Was it?" Briggs stepped closer. "Because our investigation suggests otherwise." Jonathan's eyes hardened. "I don't know what you think you found, Detective, but I can assure you everything I did was legal. Marcus Bellamy is dead," Hayes said bluntly. For the first time, Jonathan's composure cracked. Just for a second. But Briggs saw it. "That's unfortunate," Jonathan said carefully. "But I fail to see what that has to do with me." "He was blackmailing Rick Calloway," Briggs said, "for 8 years. And when Rick stopped paying, Marcus threatened to expose the whole operation, including you." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "I think," he said slowly, "that you should leave my office, unless you have a warrant." Briggs held his gaze. "We'll be back," she said, "with a warrant, and a lot more questions." They turned and left. In the elevator, Hayes exhaled. "He's involved." "Definitely," Briggs said, "but we need proof, hard proof." "What now?" Briggs pulled out her phone. "Now we dig deeper. Dr. Emily Rothman was one of the best forensic psychologists in the state. She'd evaluated dozens of defendants over her 20-year career. Murderers, rapists, arsonists. She'd seen the full spectrum of human darkness. But when she sat down across from Thomas Calloway in the evaluation room, she felt something different. Uncertainty. Thomas sat with his hands folded on the table, his shoulders hunched. He looked smaller than his 17 years. Fragile. Dr. Rothman set down her recorder and notepad. "Thomas, I'm Dr. Rothman. I've been appointed by the court to conduct a psychological evaluation. Do you understand what that means?" Thomas nodded. "I need you to answer out loud for the recording." "Yes," Thomas said quietly. "I understand." "Good. I want you to know that everything we talk about here is confidential within the bounds of the law. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to understand you, okay?" "Okay." Dr. Rothman studied him for a moment. "Let's start with how you're feeling right now." Thomas looked down at his hands. "Scared." "What are you scared of?" "Everything, prison, the trial, what people think of me." He paused. "What I might have done." Dr. Rothman made a note. "You say might have. You're not sure?" "I don't remember." "Tell me about that. When did the memory loss begin?" Thomas took a shaky breath. "The night it happened. I remember arguing with them at dinner. I remember going to my room. I remember hearing them downstairs, and then what?" "Nothing. It's just blank. Like someone hit the mute button in my brain. The next thing I remember is sitting outside, on the porch, and there was blood, so much blood." Dr. Rothman leaned forward slightly. "How did that make you feel, when you realized you were covered in blood?" Thomas's voice cracked. "Confused, terrified. I didn't understand what was happening. I thought maybe I was dreaming or having a nightmare, but I wasn't." "Did you go inside after you saw the blood?" Thomas shook his head. "No, I just sat there. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. And then the police came." Dr. Rothman wrote quickly. "Thomas, have you ever experienced memory loss like this before?" "No, never." "Do you have a history of seizures? Head injuries? Anything that might explain it?" "No." What about dissociative episodes? Times when you felt disconnected from reality? Thomas hesitated. Sometimes, when I was younger, after I was adopted, I used to have nightmares, really bad ones, and sometimes I'd wake up and not know where I was. It would take me a few minutes to remember. How often did that happen? A lot at first, then less and less as I got older. I haven't had an episode like that in years. Dr. Rothman made another note. Thomas, I want to ask you about your relationship with Rick and Maggie. Before you found out about the adoption, how would you describe it? Thomas's jaw tightened. Complicated. Can you elaborate? They were controlling, Rick especially. He monitored everything I did, where I went, who I talked to, what I looked at online. He said it was because he cared, but it didn't feel like caring. It felt like surveillance. And Maggie, Thomas's expression softened slightly. She was different, softer, but she went along with everything Rick said. She never stood up to him, even when I begged her to. Did you love them? Thomas was quiet for a long time. I don't know, he said finally. I thought I did when I was younger, but as I got older I realized I didn't really know them. They were strangers wearing parent costumes. Dr. Rothman wrote, emotional detachment, possible result of trauma and deception. Thomas, when you found out the truth about your adoption, that Maggie was your biological mother, how did that make you feel? Thomas's hands clenched into fists. Betrayed, angry, like my entire life was a lie. Did you confront them about it? Yes, at dinner, the night they died. And how did they react? Rick got defensive, angry. He told me I should be grateful, that they'd saved me from a terrible life. Maggie just cried. What did you say? Thomas's voice trembled. I told them I was done with the lies, done with the control. I told them I was going to find out the truth, about where I really came from, about who I really am. And then, Rick told me to go to my room. I left. I didn't see them again until he trailed off. Dr. Rothman waited. Until I saw them dead, Thomas finished, his voice barely a whisper. Dr. Rothman paused the session for a break. She stepped outside and called Detective Briggs. Detective, it's Dr. Rothman. I'm halfway through my evaluation of Thomas Calloway. What's your initial assessment? Briggs asked. Dr. Rothman chose her words carefully. He's exhibiting signs of acute trauma, dissociation, emotional numbing. His memory loss could be genuine, a psychological defense mechanism triggered by extreme stress. Could be? I can't rule out malingering. It's possible he's faking the memory loss to avoid culpability. But if he is, he's exceptionally convincing. What's your gut tell you? Dr. Rothman hesitated. My gut says he's telling the truth. But that doesn't mean he didn't do it. Dissociative states can involve violence. It's rare, but it happens. So he could have killed them and genuinely not remember. Yes, Briggs sighed. Anything else I should know? There's significant trauma in his background. Nightmares, dissociative episodes as a child, a history of emotional abuse and manipulation by his biological parents. All of that creates a perfect storm for a psychological break, but not necessarily a violent one. Correct. Most people who dissociate don't become violent. They shut down, withdraw, they don't commit to double homicides. So what does that mean? Dr. Rothman paused. It means I need more time. I'm going to dig deeper into his psychological history, see if there's something we're missing. Keep me posted, Briggs said. When the session resumed, Dr. Rothman shifted tactics. Thomas, I want to talk about your childhood. Before the adoption, what do you remember? Thomas frowned. Not much. Fragments, mostly. What kind of fragments? Sounds, voices. Sometimes I remember crying, or being afraid, but I don't remember faces, or places, just feelings. Do you remember your biological parents? Before Maggie gave you up? Thomas shook his head. No, I was told I was too young. But you remember being afraid. Yes. Of what? Thomas closed his eyes. I don't know. Just something. Someone. It's always there. In the back of my mind, like a shadow I can't see. Dr. Rothman leaned forward. Thomas, I want to try something. It's called guided imagery. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and try to remember. Just let your mind go where it wants to go. Don't force it, okay? Thomas looked uncertain. Okay. Close your eyes. He did. Take a deep breath. In through your nose. Out. Through your mouth. Thomas obeyed. Good. Now I want you to think back. To the earliest memory you have. Don't analyze it. Just let it come. Thomas was silent for a long moment. Then his breathing quickened. What do you see? Dr. Rothman asked gently. A room, Thomas whispered. Small. Dark. There's a window, but the curtains are closed. What else? A woman, she's crying, she's holding me, she's saying something, but I can't hear it. Can you see her face? Thomas's brow furrowed. No, it's blurry, but she smells like lavender and cigarettes. Is anyone else there? Thomas's breathing grew more ragged. Yes, a man, he's yelling, the woman is begging him to stop, but he doesn't. What's he yelling about? I don't know, I can't understand the words, but he's angry. So angry. Thomas's hands started to shake. What happens next, Thomas? The woman puts me down. She tells me to hide. I crawl under the bed. I can hear them fighting, screaming, things breaking, and then… He stopped abruptly. His eyes snapped open. He was breathing hard, his face pale. Thomas, Dr. Rothman said carefully. What happened then? Thomas shook his head, his voice barely audible. I don't know. I can't remember. But Dr. Rothman could see it in his eyes. He did remember, he just couldn't say it. After the session, Dr. Rothman sat alone in her office, reviewing her notes. Thomas's early childhood trauma was deeper than she'd initially thought. The memory he'd described, the fighting, the fear, the woman telling him to hide, suggested he'd witnessed something violent, possibly domestic abuse, possibly worse. But there was something else that bothered her. Thomas's description of the woman. Lavender and cigarettes. Dr. Rothman pulled up the case file and found a photo of Maggie from years ago. Young, thin, haunted eyes. She cross-referenced it with David Holt's testimony. Maggie had been 19 when she had Thomas. Struggling, self-destructive. And according to David, she'd been in a relationship with a man who disappeared the moment he found out she was pregnant. Dr. Rothman made a note to ask Briggs for more information about Thomas's biological father, because something told her that man was the key to understanding what had happened. That evening, Dr. Rothman called Briggs again. Detective, I need you to look into Thomas's biological father. Find out who he was, what happened to him. Why? Briggs asked. Because Thomas has repressed memories of early childhood trauma, violence, fear, and I think his biological father was involved. Briggs was quiet for a moment. You think the father abused Maggie? I think it's possible, and I think Thomas witnessed it, which means his psychological profile is even more complicated than we thought. How does that help us? It doesn't prove innocence, Dr. Rothman said, but it does suggest that Thomas has a history of dissociation in response to trauma, which supports his claim that he doesn't remember what happened that night. Briggs sighed. I'll see what I can find. Narrator's voice. The mind is a strange and fragile thing. It protects us from truths too painful to bear. It buries memories too dark to face. But sometimes those memories don't stay buried. Sometimes they claw their way to the surface. And when they do, they bring the past with them. All of it. Briggs spent the next 2 days digging into Maggie's past. It wasn't easy. Records were incomplete. People were reluctant to talk. But eventually she found something. A police report from 20 years ago. Filed in Harlow County. Incident report date. March 15, 2005. Complainant, Margaret Holt, age 19. Incident: domestic disturbance. Details: complainant reported altercation with live-in boyfriend, Vincent Crane, age 24. Complainant presented with bruising on arms and face. Stated boyfriend became violent during argument. Complainant declined to press charges. Case closed. Briggs stared at the name. Vincent Crane. She ran it through the database. Vincent Crane, criminal record, assault, battery, drug possession, last known address, Harlow County, status deceased. Briggs's heart skipped. She clicked on the details. Date of death, October 12, 2005. Cause gunshot wound, ruled self-inflicted. Location, abandoned warehouse, Harlow County. Briggs sat back, her mind racing. Vincent Crane had died 7 months after the domestic disturbance report. 7 months after Maggie filed that complaint, and just a few months before Thomas was placed in foster care. Briggs picked up the phone and called Dr. Rothman. "I found him," she said. "Thomas's biological father. His name was Vincent Crane, and he's dead." "How did he die?" "Suicide. Allegedly, gunshot wound." Dr. Rothman was quiet for a moment. "Do you believe it was suicide?" "I don't know," Briggs admitted, "but the timing is suspicious." "What are you going to do?" Briggs looked at the file in front of her. "I'm going to find out what really happened to Vincent Crane." The name Vincent Crane hung in Briggs's mind like a ghost. She'd spent the last day pulling every record she could find. Police reports, court documents, medical records. What she discovered painted a picture of a violent, unstable man who'd left a trail of destruction wherever he went. But one thing didn't add up. His death ruled a suicide, but the investigating officer's notes contained a single line that made Briggs pause. "Scene inconsistent with self-inflicted wound. Further investigation recommended." But there was no further investigation. The case had been closed within 48 hours. Why? Briggs drove back to Harlow County, this time alone. She needed to talk to someone who'd been there, someone who remembered Vincent Crane. She found that person at a small diner on the edge of town. His name was Roy Kimball, retired sheriff's deputy, 72 years old. He'd been one of the first responders to Vincent's death. Roy sat in a corner booth, nursing a cup of black coffee. Briggs slid into the seat across from him. "Mr. Kimball, I'm Detective Briggs. Thanks for meeting with me." Roy looked her over with tired, knowing eyes. "You said this was about Vincent Crane." "That's right." Roy shook his head slowly. "I was wondering when someone would come asking about that." "Why do you say that?" Roy took a sip of his coffee. "Because that case never sat right with me. Never has." Briggs leaned forward. "Tell me what you remember." Roy set down his cup. "It was October, cold night. We got a call about a body in the old Miller warehouse. When we arrived, Vincent was on the floor. Single gunshot to the head, gun beside him. Looked like a textbook suicide. But the angle was wrong. The gun was in his right hand, but the entry wound suggested he would have had to contort his arm in a way that didn't make sense. And there were drag marks, like someone had moved the body after the fact." Briggs's pulse quickened. "Did you report this?" "Of course I did. I told my supervisor, pushed for a full investigation, but the next day the case was closed, ruled self-inflicted. End of story." "Who was your supervisor?" Roy's expression darkened. "Sheriff Dan Kellerman. He's dead now. Heart attack 5 years back. But at the time he had connections, political ones, and he didn't like people asking questions." "Do you think he was covering something up?" Roy met her eyes. "I know he was." Briggs pulled out her notepad. "Did Vincent have any enemies? Anyone who might have wanted him dead?" Roy laughed bitterly. "Vincent had nothing but enemies. He was a piece of work, violent, paranoid, owed money to half the town. But one person hated him more than anyone." "Who?" "Margaret Holt." Briggs's stomach tightened. "Why?" "Because Vincent put her through hell, beat her, controlled her. She filed reports twice, but she always dropped the charges. Scared, I guess. But after the second time, she disappeared. Just left town. Took the baby with her. Thomas. Roy nodded. I heard she gave him up, put him in the system. Can't say I blame her. That kid had seen things no child should see. Do you think Maggie killed Vincent? Roy shrugged. I think someone did. And if it was her, I wouldn't have blamed her for that either. Briggs sat back, her mind spinning. If Maggie had killed Vincent, that changed everything. It meant she'd been carrying that secret for nearly 2 decades. It meant she'd been living in fear of it coming out. And it meant someone might have known. Briggs drove back to Ridgemont, her thoughts racing. She needed to talk to someone who'd known Maggie well. Someone who might have suspected the truth. She found that person at the church where Maggie used to volunteer. Her name was Ellen Martinez, mid-60s. Warm eyes. She'd been Maggie's closest friend. They sat in the church office, surrounded by choir robes and hymnals. I still can't believe she's gone, Ellen said, her voice thick with grief. Maggie was such a kind soul. Mrs. Martinez, how long did you know Maggie? About 12 years. We met when she first started volunteering here. Did she ever talk about her past, before she married Rick? Ellen hesitated. Not much. She kept that part of her life private. But I could tell she carried pain. Deep pain. What makes you say that? Ellen looked down at her hands. Sometimes, when we were alone, she'd get this look in her eyes, like she was somewhere else, somewhere dark. And once she said something that stuck with me. What did she say? Ellen's voice dropped to a whisper. She said, I did something terrible once and I'll never be forgiven for it. Briggs's chest tightened. Did she say what it was? No. I asked, but she just shook her head and changed the subject. I never brought it up again. When was this? About 6 months ago. Right around the time she seemed different. Different how? Anxious, frightened. Like she was waiting for something bad to happen. Briggs made notes quickly. Did she mention anyone threatening her? Anyone from her past? Ellen frowned. Not directly, but there was one thing. A few. Weeks before she died, a man came to the church looking for her. Briggs looked up sharply. Who? I don't know. I'd never seen him before. Tall. Well-dressed. He asked to speak with Maggie privately. She went pale when she saw him. They talked outside for a few minutes, and when she came back in, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. Did you hear what they talked about? No, but after he left, I asked if everything was okay. She said it was nothing. An old acquaintance, but I didn't believe her. Briggs leaned forward. Can you describe him? Ellen thought for a moment. 50s. Silver. Hair. Expensive suit. He carried himself like someone important. Briggs's blood ran cold. Jonathan Parrish. Thank you, Mrs. Martinez, Briggs said, standing quickly. You've been very helpful. Briggs called Hayes as soon as she got to her car. Hayes, I need you to pull everything on Jonathan. Parrish. Phone records, financial transactions, travel history, everything. What did you find? He was at Maggie's church a few weeks before she died, and whatever he said to her, it terrified her. Hayes whistled low. You think he was threatening her? I think he knew about Vincent Crane, and I think he was using it as leverage. For what? That's what we need to find out. 2 hours later, Hayes called back. Briggs, you're not going to believe this. What? Jonathan Parrish made a wire transfer to Marcus Bellamy the day before Marcus died. Briggs's heart raced. How much? $50,000. Jesus, what was it for? I don't know, but it wasn't a loan. The memo line says final payment. Briggs gripped the steering wheel. He paid Marcus off to keep him quiet. And when Marcus didn't stay quiet, Jonathan killed him. And then? Briggs's mind raced. And then he went after Rick and Maggie to eliminate anyone who could tie him to the illegal adoptions. But what about Thomas? Hayes asked. Where does he fit in? Briggs was silent for a moment. Then it hit her. Thomas doesn't fit in, she said slowly. He was never supposed to be there. What do you mean? I mean, Jonathan didn't expect Thomas to be home that night. He came to kill Rick and Maggie, to tie up loose ends. But Thomas was there, and Thomas saw something. Maybe not everything, but enough. So Jonathan framed him? Or Thomas's mind did. His memory blacked out to protect him from the trauma of what he witnessed. Hayes exhaled. We need to bring Jonathan in. Not yet, we don't have enough. It's all circumstantial. Then what do? Briggs thought for a moment. We talk to Thomas again, and this time, we help him remember. Narrator's voice. The truth was buried under layers of lies, fear, and carefully constructed deception. But piece by piece it was coming to light. Vincent Crane, Marcus Bellamy, Jonathan Parrish, all connected by greed, violence, and secrets too dangerous to expose. And in the middle of it all was a 17-year-old boy who'd spent his entire life being used as a pawn. But pawns can become powerful pieces if they survive long enough to see the endgame. Detective Briggs and Dr. Rothman sat across from Thomas in the evaluation room. This time, there was a third person present, a forensic hypnotherapist named Dr. Alan Chen. He was in his 50s, calm and methodical, with a reputation for helping witnesses recover suppressed memories. Thomas looked between them nervously. What's happening? He asked. Dr. Rothman spoke gently. Thomas, we believe you witnessed something the night your parents died. Something your mind blocked. Out to protect you. Dr. Chen specializes in helping people access those memories safely. Thomas's hands trembled. I don't know if I want to remember. I understand, Dr. Chen said. But the truth might be the only thing that saves you. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Dr. Chen dimmed the lights and had Thomas sit in a reclining chair. Close your eyes, he said softly. Take deep breaths, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Thomas obeyed, his breathing gradually slowing. Good. Now I want you to imagine you're standing at the top of a staircase, 10 steps down. At the bottom is the night of October 14th. We're going to walk down together, one step at a time, okay? Okay, Thomas whispered. Step 1. You're in your room. You can hear voices downstairs. What do you hear? Thomas's brow furrowed. Rick. Maggie. They're arguing. What are they saying? Rick says, he knows too much. Maggie says, we have to tell him the truth. Step 2. What happens next? Rick says no. Says it'll ruin everything. Says someone's coming. Someone who'll fix it. Briggs leaned forward. Who's coming, Thomas? I don't know, I can't hear, Dr. Chen continued. Step 3. You leave your room, where do you go? Downstairs, I want to know what they're talking about. Step 4. What do you see? Thomas's breathing quickened. The living room. Rick's pacing. Maggie's crying. She sees me. Her face goes white. Step 5. What does she say? She says, Thomas, go back upstairs. But I don't. I ask what's going on, who's coming. Step 6. What does Rick do? Thomas's voice cracked. He grabs my arm, hard, tells me to go to my room now. But then, he stopped. Then what, Thomas? The doorbell rings. Briggs and Dr. Rothman exchanged glances. Step 7. Who's at the door? Thomas's face twisted in concentration. Rick tells Maggie to take me upstairs. She tries, but I pull away. I see Rick open the door, and there's a man. Describe him. Tall, silver hair, suit. He looks angry. Briggs felt her pulse spike. Jonathan Parrish. Step 8. What happens next? Thomas's breathing grew ragged. Rick tries to close the door, but the man pushes inside. He's yelling, saying Rick broke their agreement, saying he's owed money. What does Rick say? He says he doesn't have it, says he can't keep paying. The man gets angrier, says, Rick should have thought of that before. Step 9. Thomas, stay with me. What happens next? Thomas's whole body tensed. Maggie screams, tells me to run. I don't understand. I freeze. And then, his eyes snapped open. He was hyperventilating. Dr. Chen immediately intervened. Thomas, you're safe. You're here with us. Breathe. But Thomas was shaking violently, tears streaming down his face. He had a knife, Thomas gasped. The man. He had a knife. He went for Rick. Rick tried to fight him, but the man was too fast. He stabbed him, over and over, and Maggie. Thomas broke down completely. Dr. Rothman moved to his side, placing a hand on his shoulder. Thomas, you're doing so well. Just a little more. What happened to Maggie? Thomas could barely speak through his sobs. She tried to run, to get to the phone, but he caught her, hit her. She fell, and then he couldn't finish. Briggs's chest ached. Thomas, she said gently, what happened to you after that? Thomas looked up, his face streaked with tears. I ran out the back door. I heard him behind me. I hid, in the bushes, I don't know how long, and when I came back, they were gone, and I was covered in blood. I must have gone inside, touched them, tried to wake them up, but I don't remember. He buried his face in his hands. I don't remember. After the session, Briggs stepped outside with Dr. Chen and Dr. Rothman. Is it reliable? Briggs asked. Memory recovered under hypnosis? Dr. Chen nodded. It won't hold up as evidence in court, but it can point us in the right direction. He described Jonathan Parrish, Briggs said. Everything matches. Then you need to move fast, Dr. Rothman said, before Parrish realizes we're onto him. Briggs called Hayes. We have enough. Get a warrant. We're bringing Jonathan Parrish in, narrator's voice. The pieces were falling into place. Vincent Crane, Marcus Bellamy, Rick and Maggie Calloway, all dead, all silenced. And at the center of it all was a man who'd built an empire on lies and blood money. But empires fall, and Jonathan Parrish's was about to crumble. 6 months later, the courtroom was packed once again. The trial had been a media spectacle. Every major network covered it. Legal analysts debated endlessly. The public remained divided. But today, the waiting was over. The jury had reached a verdict. Thomas sat between his attorneys, Aaron Grant, and a high-profile defense lawyer named Sandra Mills, who'd taken the case pro bono after the hypnotherapy revelations went public. Across the aisle sat District Attorney Monica Reeves, stone-faced and resolute. Despite the new evidence, Dale Pritchard's testimony, the financial records linking Jonathan Parrish, Thomas's recovered memories, the prosecution had fought hard. They argued the memories were unreliable, that Thomas had constructed a convenient narrative to escape responsibility, that the evidence still pointed to him, and the jury had listened. For 3 weeks, they'd heard testimony, seen crime scene photos, watched Thomas break down on the stand. Now they filed back into the courtroom. Judge Patricia Henshaw, no relation to the neighbor who'd called 911, looked at the jury foreman. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. The foreman stood, holding a piece of paper. The courtroom fell silent. Thomas's heart hammered in his chest. On the charge of murder in the first degree of Richard Calloway, we find the defendant guilty. Gasps echoed through the room. Thomas felt the floor drop out from under him. On the charge of murder in the first degree of Margaret Calloway, we find the defendant guilty. Sandra Mills closed her eyes. Aaron Grant put a hand on Thomas's shoulder, but Thomas didn't feel it. He was numb. Judge Henshaw spoke, her voice firm. Thomas Calloway, you have been found guilty on both counts. This court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The gavel struck. It was over. Thomas stood slowly, his legs shaking. Deputies moved toward him, and that's when he snapped. No! His voice echoed through the courtroom. I'm not going to prison! He lunged forward, not toward toward Judge this time, but toward the prosecution table, toward Monica Reeves, his face twisted in anguish and rage. Deputies tackled him before he got close. As they wrestled him to the ground, Thomas screamed, a raw, primal sound of desperation. I didn't do it! I didn't, he did! Parrish did it! But his Words were drowned out by the chaos. The judge shouted for order. The gallery erupted. And as the deputies dragged Thomas from the courtroom, he caught one final glimpse of Detective Briggs in the back row. She was crying. Because she knew he was innocent. But it didn't matter. The system had spoken, and Thomas Calloway was going to prison for the rest of his life. Narrator's voice: justice is supposed to be blind, but sometimes it's just blind. The Oregon State Penitentiary was cold, not just physically, though the concrete walls seemed to leach warmth from the air, but emotionally, spiritually. Thomas had been inside for 3 months. 3 months of orange jumpsuits and metal bars. 3 months of sleepless nights and hollow days. 3 months of becoming invisible. He kept to himself, mostly. Ate alone. Worked in the prison library shelving books. Avoided eye contact. The other inmates left him alone. They knew his story. Some thought he was guilty. Some didn't care. Either way, he was just another lifer now. Just another ghost haunting the corridors. Aaron Grant visited twice a month. He brought updates on the appeal, which was going nowhere. The evidence was circumstantial. The hypnotherapy wasn't admissible, and Jonathan Parrish had an alibi, a solid one. Security footage from his office building showed him there until 11:15 p.m. the night of the murders. 15 minutes after Patricia Henley heard the screaming. It was airtight. "I'm sorry, Thomas," Aaron said during one visit, his voice heavy with defeat. "We've exhausted every avenue, unless new evidence surfaces." "It won't," Thomas said flatly. "You don't know that." Thomas looked at him with dead eyes. "Yes, I do. He's too smart, too connected. He got away with it." Aaron didn't. Aaron argue, because deep down, he believed it too. Detective Briggs hadn't given up. She couldn't. Every night she went home and spread the case files across her dining table, searching for something, anything. She'd tried to get a warrant to search Jonathan Parrish's home and office, but the judge denied it. Insufficient evidence. She'd tried to get his phone records subpoenaed, denied. She'd tried everything, and she'd failed. Hayes told her to let it go, that sometimes the bad guys win, that she'd done everything she could. But Briggs couldn't accept that because she'd looked into Thomas's eyes. She'd heard his story. She'd watched him break under the weight of a crime he didn't commit. And she knew. She knew he was innocent. One cold December evening, Briggs got a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Detective Briggs. Silence, then a voice, distorted, digitally altered. "Stop looking into Jonathan Parrish." Briggs's blood ran cold. "Who is this?" "Someone who knows what you're doing, and someone who's telling you to stop, for your own safety." "Is this a threat?" A pause. "It's a warning. You have a daughter, don't you, Emma?" 12 years old, goes to Lincoln Middle School. Briggs's heart stopped. "If you touch my daughter, then stop. Walk away. Let it go." The line went dead. Briggs sat frozen, her hands shaking. They knew where her daughter went to school. They were watching her, and they weren't afraid to make her disappear. That night, Briggs made a decision. She couldn't pursue Parrish officially, not without putting Emma in danger. But she could do something else. She could make sure someone else knew the truth, someone who might be able to act where she couldn't. The next day, Briggs drove to Portland and walked into the offices of Beyond Reasonable Doubt, the podcast that had first questioned the verdict. Rachel Kim greeted her personally. "Detective Briggs, I wasn't expecting you." Briggs handed her a thumb drive. "Everything's on here. Financial records, witness statements, case files, things that didn't make it into the trial." Rachel looked at the drive, then at Briggs. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because I can't do anything more." "But you can. You have a platform. Use it." Rachel studied her for a long moment. "You believe Thomas is innocent." "I know he is." "And you think Jonathan Parrish killed Rick and Maggie Calloway?" "I do." Rachel took the drive, or I'll look into it. "Be careful," Briggs warned. Parrish is dangerous, and he has reach. Rachel smiled grimly. So do I. 3 weeks later, Beyond Reasonable Doubt released a special episode. The Calloway case. What the... Jury didn't hear. It went viral within hours. Rachel laid out everything, the financial connections, the timeline discrepancies, the threatening phone call to Briggs. She interviewed David Holt, Dale Pritchard, Ellen Martinez, and she ended with a direct challenge to Jonathan Parrish. If you're innocent, Rachel said into the microphone, then prove it. Sit down with me, answer the questions, clear your name. Parrish declined. His lawyers issued a statement calling the podcast irresponsible journalism and threatening legal action. But the damage was done. Public opinion was shifting. Narrator's voice. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. Sometimes it just keeps you company in the dark. But even in the darkest places, a single light can change everything. And for Thomas Calloway, locked away in a cell he didn't deserve, that light was about to flicker to life. It came from the most unexpected place. A storage unit in Salem, Oregon. Abandoned, overdue on payments for 6 months, auctioned off to pay the debt. The buyer, a middle-aged woman named Donna Fletcher, who made her living reselling forgotten junk, didn't expect to find anything valuable. But when she pried open a locked filing cabinet, she froze. Inside were dozens of files, legal documents, photographs, and recordings. Digital recordings labeled with dates, names, and case numbers. One of them was labeled Calloway, October 14th. Donna called the police immediately. Within hours, Briggs was on scene. She stood in the storage unit, staring at the cabinet like it was a ghost. Whose unit was this? She asked the storage facility manager. He checked his records. Registered to a Marcus Bellamy. Briggs's heart stopped. Marcus Bellamy, the blackmailer. The man found dead in his home, staged as a suicide. He'd left insurance. Briggs brought the recordings back to the station and played them with Hayes and Captain Ruiz present. The first file was dated October 13th, 1 day before the murders. A phone conversation, 2 voices. One was Marcus Bellamy, the other was unmistakable. Jonathan. Parrish? Marcus. I told you, Jonathan, I'm done. You don't pay, I go to the police, simple as that. Jonathan. You think you can threaten me after everything I've done for you? Marcus. You didn't do anything for me. You used me, just like you used Rick, just like you used all of us. Jonathan. Rick's weak, he's falling apart, he's going to talk. Marcus. That's not my problem, Jonathan. Long pause. Then I'll make it your problem. Marcus. What's that supposed to mean? Jonathan. It means people who become liabilities tend to disappear, Marcus. You should remember that. Marcus. You threatening me? Jonathan. I'm stating a fact. Call ends. Briggs and Hayes sat in stunned silence. He threatened him, Hayes said. On tape, Briggs played the next file. October 14th, 9:47 p.m. Another call. This time between Jonathan and Rick Calloway. Rick. Jonathan, we need to talk. Jonathan. Not over the phone. Rick. I can't keep doing this. The payments, the lies. Thomas knows. He's asking questions. Jonathan. Then shut him up. Rick. Shocked. What? Jonathan. You heard me. You want this to go away? Make it go away. Rick. I'm not going to hurt my son. Jonathan. He's not your son, Rick. He's a mistake, a loose end. And if you don't handle it, I will. Call ends. Briggs felt sick. He ordered Rick to kill Thomas, she whispered. Ruiz's face was pale. Keep going. The final recording was time-stamped October 14th, 10:52 p.m., right after the murders. It was a voicemail left on Jonathan's phone. A panicked voice, not Rick, not Maggie, someone else. Voice. It's done, but there's a problem. The kid was there. He saw me. I don't know if he recognized me, but... Jesus, Jonathan, this wasn't part of the plan. You said they'd be alone. You said... Background. Noise. Sirens approaching. Voice. Shit, I have to go. Call me. Message ends. Briggs played it again. The voice was muffled, stressed, but familiar. She ran it through audio analysis software. 10 minutes later, the results came back. Match, 87% probability. Gerald Whitmore, Briggs's stomach. Dropped. Rick's boss, the man who'd given him the advance, the man who'd said Rick seemed relieved after paying it back. Gerald Whitmore had killed Rick and Maggie Calloway on Jonathan Parrish's orders. The arrest happened fast. SWAT teams hit both locations simultaneously. Jonathan Parrish was taken into custody at his home. Gerald Whitmore at his office. Both men denied everything, but the recordings didn't lie. 2 weeks later, Thomas Calloway sat in a conference room at the prison. Briggs sat across from him, tears in her eyes. "It's over, Thomas," she said quietly. "They found the proof. Jonathan Parrish and Gerald Whitmore have been charged with the murders of Rick and Maggie Calloway and Marcus Bellamy." Thomas stared at her, his face blank. "What does that mean?" "It means you're being released. Today. All charges dropped. You're free." Thomas didn't react. He just sat. "There." "Thomas," Briggs said gently. "Did you hear me? You're free." Thomas looked down at his hands. "I don't feel free," he whispered. That afternoon, Thomas walked out of the Oregon State Penitentiary. No press, no cameras, just Briggs waiting by her car. He stood on the sidewalk staring at the open sky. He'd been inside for 8 months. 8 months of his life stolen. 8 months he'd never get back. Briggs approached slowly. "Where do you want to go?" Thomas didn't answer, because he didn't know. He had no home, no family, no one, just freedom. And it felt like nothing. 3 months. Later, a package arrived at Detective Briggs's office. Inside was a single DVD, no return address. She played it. The screen flickered to life. Thomas sat in a stark room, staring directly at the camera. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. When he spoke, his voice was flat, empty. "Thomas, they say I should be grateful that justice was served, that the truth came out. But the truth didn't save me. It didn't bring them back. It didn't give me back the months I lost, the life I'll never have. The truth just showed me how easy it is to destroy someone, how little it takes, a lie, a secret, a man, with money and power. That's all it took to ruin me, and even now, knowing what I know, I still see their faces. Rick, Maggie, the people who lied to me, who used me, but also the people who tried, in their broken way, to give me something. And I hate them, and I miss them, and I don't know how to live with that." He stopped, stared at the camera, and for the first time his expression changed. Not to sadness, not to relief, just nothing. He looked empty, hollow, and then the screen went black. Narrator's voice, slow, deliberate. The truth was buried, not to protect the guilty, but to maintain the most convenient lie. Jonathan Parrish is awaiting trial. He'll likely spend the rest of his life in prison. Gerald Whitmore confessed. He's already behind bars. And Thomas Calloway? He's free. But freedom, as it turns out, isn't the same as justice. And justice isn't the same as peace. Sometimes the truth destroys everything, even the people it's meant to save.